At the farthest western edge of the great Tylus Empire stood the Academy of the Duchy of Riloni, an ancient institution of learning surrounded by mountains and mists. It was called the Ivory Tower of the countryside, a symbol of solitude and knowledge where young minds spent years in search of truth and power. One foggy evening, unknown persons suddenly burst into the Academy's laboratory. They shouted loudly, demanding that the traitor be punished immediately, as if they already knew who they needed. An order was given to seize everyone bearing the name Frele, without trial or explanation. These turned out to be soldiers of the Tylus Empire, who declared that the Frele family was preparing treason and collaborating with the enemies of the throne. Upon hearing that her grandfather, Duke Skari, was under suspicion, Frele, the girl was stunned. The Duke was a powerful man, and the accusations sounded like madness. Their father disappeared under mysterious circumstances when Christina was still a child, and the family never learned the truth about his fate. Her older brothers, Alex and Joshua, grew up to be wayward and achieved fame in their own right, each in their own field. Their cousin Melissa became famous as a magician of great power, and the people even called her a saint for her good deeds. The soldiers claimed that they had to return to the capital not only those arrested, but also all of their developments, including prohibited artifacts. They added that they were late for the execution, as if the fate had already been decided in advance. Stunned, Christina rushed to seek help from the dean of the academy, hoping for protection. But the dean only looked away, pretending not to notice her presence. He calmly told the professor that after Christina Frele's death, all her patents would go to the academy. And he recalled that the professor himself agreed to work under such conditions, having no right to retreat. Christina could not understand how she had become embroiled in such a large-scale case of treason that threatened the entire empire. She remembered that recently the postman Dorothy had been complaining about the difficulties and lateness of the newspapers, as if storm clouds were gathering over everyone. Christina was a brilliant engineer of magical technology, a science that combines magic and mechanics. Her inventions were based on complex formulas and laws of nature, and many patents belonged solely to her. She left the Frele family to devote herself to study and work at the academy for 7 years, away from politics. The dean who once called her one of a kind has become almost like family to her over time, but now he has betrayed her, selling everything connected with her for the sake of profit and the patronage of imperial officials. In despair, Christina swore that even if she made a deal with the demon, she would destroy the dean and his entire family down to the last descendant. By the time she was 23, she was already heading a department at a small academy in a duchy on the outskirts of the continent. It was her own project, into which she had invested years of work, not suspecting how soon everything would collapse. Unexpectedly, she was sentenced to death and ordered to be delivered to the Empire under heavy guard. As soon as she arrived, she was thrown into a gloomy underground prison near the Imperial Palace. In the damp dungeon, Christina sat in silence until she suddenly heard someone's voice addressing her. They grabbed her by the arms. Familiar eyes, a trembling voice asked if it was really her. Before her stood Melissa, her cousin, endowed with divine strength and the same determined character. Melissa burst into tears of joy, admitting that she had been waiting for this meeting for a long time and had not lost hope. Christina, in disbelief, asked what was going on and admitted that she did not understand anything about the accusations against her grandfather. Melissa cried harder, insisting that Duke Skari would never have betrayed the Empire and that they had been lied to. Christina tried to calm her sister, asking her to think calmly and logically. Then Melissa said that yesterday the prince himself confessed that it was he who accused the Frele family of treason. According to her summoned creature Piagi, Melissa once rejected the advances of a prince. And now, considering himself insulted, he decided to take revenge by making her experience the same pain as he did. Piagi, a yellow spirit bird created by the goddess, recently lost consciousness after a debilitating spell. Christina just sighed heavily, deciding that her grandfather must have been too tired and weak to allow himself to be drawn into such a trap. Melissa continued to talk about the prince and their grandfather Skari. Frele. She announced that the hour of execution had arrived and that the criminals should now be summoned to carry out the sentence. Melissa, in tears, turned to Christina, begging her to tell her if it was true that she was about to die. Her voice trembled, and fear literally paralyzed her body, preventing her from taking a single step, but deep down she couldn't believe she was going to die. After all, divine power flowed through her veins, and with such power, it was impossible to simply die without leaving a trace. Christina watched her sister in horror. Melissa, pale and trembling, began repeating about the convent, as if going there early could have saved her from her fate. She thought that if she had obediently left her family and become a humble nun, she might have been able to live a quiet but long life without being drawn into this chaos. Christina grabbed Melissa's hands, trying to stop the madness. She demanded that her sister not lose her mind, otherwise nothing would help. After all, if Melissa can't return to the past, then how did she suddenly end up in a monastery? As if fate itself had transported her there. But Melissa seemed oblivious. A fanatical fire blazed in her eyes, and she declared that her power could turn back time, even if it meant sacrificing herself. She insisted she would try to turn back time a year, preserving all her memories. Then, she said, she would enter a monastery and dedicate her life to service and redemption. Determination took over her. Melissa decided she would never die. At that moment, her body glowed with a soft yet strangely frightening light. She screamed that her death would not be in vain, and the light around her became blindingly bright, as if the heavenly power itself was answering her call. Then someone called Christina, and a voice demanded that she wake up. Everything began to blur, as if the world around her was collapsing. She opened her eyes, but had no idea where she was. Before her was a strange room, completely unfamiliar and alien. A moment ago, she was sitting in a cell, and now a guy was standing next to her, grumbling discontentedly that he had already asked her 100 times not to sleep in this place. He reminded her that he understood her obsession with her degree, but cleaning up the lab after her late-night experiments was becoming increasingly difficult. He complained that he didn't have any special skills, but he was still listed as a co-author on the projects because he was a relative of the dean. Christina stood there, confused. The whole situation seemed so absurd to her that she couldn't help but respond timidly, not understanding what was going on. She flared up, saying that he was just a junior teacher and had no right to criticize her, and that he should leave before she lost her patience. But the guy grinned, noticing that it seemed the lady had not yet woken up, because the professor was not he at all, but she herself. After these words, he simply shrugged his shoulders and left, saying that let her do as she pleases. He doesn't care. Christina was left alone and noticed a lab coat, exactly like the one she'd worn during her doctoral studies. Everything that was happening seemed like a dream to her. She remembered calling him junior professor, and now she felt awkward. Perhaps she shouldn't have spoken so harshly. There was a newspaper on the table, probably left by that same guy, and Christina automatically reached for it. She froze as she read the first lines. Surprise and disbelief overwhelmed her, as if she had encountered the impossible. At first, she thought it was a stupid mistake or a joke, because what was written could not be true. But the more she read, the more she realized. She really had returned to the past. Everything was all too accurate. The newspaper wrote that Melissa Frele submitted a petition to the monastery, wishing to become a novice and leave the family estate. It was also mentioned there that she was going to dedicate her life to volunteering to help those in need, completely giving up worldly luxuries. Christina remembered Melissa talking about her intention to turn back time and enter a monastery. Everything matched, down to the smallest detail. Now Christina began to wonder, perhaps Melissa really did possess divine powers capable of changing the very course of time. It became clear that it was her power that turned the past back, giving a chance to replay everything. Christina decided to take action. She decided to write a letter to the monastery, where Melissa was now staying, to check everything out for herself. In the letter, she carefully hinted that she also remembered the events of the past, hoping that her sister would understand her hint. Even she herself found it strange that she had decided to do this. After all, sending a letter would mean admitting the unthinkable. But even if Melissa doesn't figure it out, Christina will think she's a complete fool and won't interfere anymore. For now, she decided to go into hiding and think over a plan to understand how to proceed and change the course of events. A few days later, Melissa's summoned creature, Piagi, flew through the window. It carried a letter sealed with the Frelai sign. The creature calmly observed the dark room where Christina sat without light. It was not surprised by her gloomy appearance. Christina looked tired and almost exhausted. She immediately understood why he had come without asking a single question. Piagi looked around the table and asked what all these notes and calculations scattered everywhere meant. But Christina angrily ordered him to be quiet. The noise was disturbing her thinking, and she wanted the room to be quiet. A lot of time had passed since they had seen each other, but the fox still wrote to them, reminding them of herself with short but strangely warm letters. Christina often grumbled at her, pretending to be indifferent, although deep down she was genuinely worried and anxious about her. The others said that Christina was simply jealous and acting like an arrogant aristocrat, but no one understood that there was concern hidden behind it. Melissa always believed there was a grain of kindness in Christina, even if the last thing she heard from her was hurtful and harsh. Melissa then promised herself that when they met again, she would make Christina clean every pit out of the strawberries as punishment for her stubbornness. In one of her letters, she wrote that one morning she woke up with the feeling that fate itself had told her to become a novice and go to a monastery. She took it as a revelation from the gods, and Christina realized that Melissa simply did not want to die and chose to escape. In the letter, Melissa also wrote that she left a gift for Christina, a notarized deed of transfer of all her property. But Pyagi said that the real gift was himself, since Melissa had refused him, deciding that she no longer needed the summoned creature. So she sent him to Christina, passing on part of her will along with him, as if she wanted him to look after her. The Freeley family has long been known for their ability to summon their own unique creatures, which was considered an ancient gift. This usually took place over a period of about 8 years, and each creature had special powers that reflected the character of its owner. But this gift passed Christina by. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't summon anyone. Even as an adult, she was never able to summon the creature, and over time, she stopped believing that it was even possible. Now, leaving the estate and leaving everything behind, she understood that the story with her creature had gone too far. Pyagi said that turning back time with divine power was almost impossible, but Melissa apparently believed that she could. When she did this, a connection was established between them, as if the thread of time itself had connected them at that moment. However, for some unknown reason, only Pyagi and Christina retained memories of the regression, unlike Melissa. This means that Melissa didn't even realize that she had returned to the past. She simply acted by inertia, not understanding what was happening. The only thing that remained in her memory was the decision to become a novice and leave the House of Freeley forever. Therefore, immediately after returning in time, she rushed to the monastery, causing quite a stir around her. Christina asked Pyagi if he had thought about telling Melissa what had happened and that she had gone back in time. But he replied that no, because Melissa no longer belonged to the Freeley family, and therefore he was forbidden to tell her the truth. Summoned creatures swear to serve only the Freeley, and cannot be loyal to others, even if the new master were kinder. Christina asked if he thought she was terrible, but Pyagi denied it. For them, the very fact of being called up meant more than a person's character. It felt strange to her to realize that the creature Melissa had summoned now saw her as a true Freeley, and not as someone else. After this, Pyagi declared that since she had already read the letter, she should explain what these meaningless and vague lines were. He admitted that just looking at them made him feel dizzy, as if he were locked in a musty den. Christina replied that these were just traces of her painful thoughts about the future and her own mistakes. Then he asked who could be so tormented by doubts as if it were the work of a lifetime. She said that she is one of those people who always tries to the end and does not give up on what she started, even if it destroys her. If things continue as they are now, the duchy will truly find itself in a hopeless situation. Pyagi noted that despite Christina's efforts, he doubted whether the duchy could be saved under the current circumstances. She lived in the outback and knew almost nothing about what was going on in the empire. She only had a weak thread of guesses. Christina admitted that he was right, because no matter how sarcastically he spoke, she really was poorly informed. But suddenly, a brilliant solution came to her. After all, Pyagi certainly knows what is happening in the capital and in the empire itself. All this time, he remained close to Melissa, which meant he could tell her everything, even the smallest details. She gave him 2 weeks, showing generosity, but he was stunned to hear that he had to remember the events of many years. Pyagi was outraged that she was so heartless, forcing the small, exhausted creature to work without rest. He recalled that he almost died from fatigue while flying from afar to deliver that very letter to her. But Christina firmly stated that he could handle it, because they had a common cause and limited time. She wanted him to make every effort because the future of the family depended on their joint actions. Christina quietly added that she no longer remembered all the details, but she knew one thing. She couldn't waste another day. He understood that he had to put in far more effort. If he could channel all his power into the right direction, he could tilt the situation in his favor. Birdie was already regretting his decision to come here. No one had warned him that Christina was a strange and overly hardworking girl. He remembered everything, but he wished that events had not developed so quickly, as if someone had sped up time, not giving him the opportunity to comprehend what was happening. Then he asked her to calm down a bit. It occurred to him that there was another way to solve the problem without resorting to extremes. She answered calmly, reminding him that she had warned him. If he tried, everything would definitely work out. He just had to not give up. He explained that summoned creatures were able to directly transmit memories to their masters, without the need for words or gestures. Christina asked again, and he clarified. The transfer of memories occurs in the form of visions, as if the owner himself is observing the past. Because of this, Christina did not understand why memories came to her not as images, but as if written lines of text. It all reminded her of reading a long novel in which Melissa suddenly became the main character, not her. What irritated Christina most was that the story was told in the third person, as if someone was watching from the side and describing every action. The bird admitted that he couldn't change anything. After all, he was only Melissa's summoned creature and not an independent person. He could only see and hear what was happening around Melissa, so the connection between him and Christina remained incomplete. It is probably because of this imperfect connection that memories are transmitted in a way that resembles someone reading a mediocre romance novel. Christina knew that Melissa enjoyed the attention of men, but after her departure, her sister became the object of mad love and admiration. Amidst all this chaos, Christina's name would occasionally surface, spoken with relief on the lips of others, as if her departure were a blessing. One of the men said that if the villainous Christina had remained in the Empire, Melissa would have suffered much more. Another insisted that only Melissa was able to heal her old wounds left by that same cruel Christina from her childhood. And the third one lamented that now that Christina had gone so far away, he would no longer be able to challenge her to a duel and take revenge. All this irritated Christina, but she understood that now was not the time to dwell on other people's words. The main thing now is to understand the key events that took place in the Empire and understand where everything went wrong. It was especially important to study the moment when the duchy was accused of treason, since it was this moment that marked the beginning of the tragedy. Since all this really happened, Christina believed that we were talking about past events that had already happened, so she decided to think of it as a written story that could be analyzed without interfering directly. Now she could look at it again and again, turning the pages as if she were reading an original work about her own destiny. Based on this original work, Christina began the analysis, because they had to act in accordance with plans number 57 and 122.0. But then she decided to combine shots 111 and 121, and also add pieces from 181 and 182 to them to achieve a greater effect. The bird was surprised that Christina remembered all these plans, but she only grinned, saying that there weren't that many of them, and it was time for her to go to the duchy. After all, only she knew what would happen next, and therefore she had to act independently without relying on anyone. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Christina became wary, wondering who could have come and why they were making such a fuss. A voice came from behind the door. The dean was calling her. That same grumpy old man she couldn't stand. Bertie reminded Christina that she should hurry. The introductory briefing would start very soon, and she couldn't be late. The dean insisted that everyone gather on time, as Christina was supposed to open the meeting with a speech. The event was intended for prospective students and their parents who were considering applying to the academy. The dean wanted to make an impression by flaunting Christina as a talented scholar and an aristocrat of the highest rank. All this, of course, was done for the sake of tuition fees. After all, the more students, the more revenue goes to the treasury. Yes, money was the old man's true goal, and he didn't even try to hide it. Christina smiled coldly, deciding that she would speak out immediately in order to get rid of this responsibility as quickly as possible. But before returning to the duchy, she wanted to somehow repay the dean, even if it was a small but pleasant revenge. The Riloni Academy was already filled with people waiting for the presentation to begin. Christina took the stage and addressed the future first-year students, and their parents gathered in the hall. The dean thanked everyone for their visit and expressed his appreciation for the interest shown in the academy. Then he, with an air of importance, introduced to those gathered the pride of the institution, their outstanding professor. This professor turned out to be Christina Frele, a representative of an ancient and respected family. Christina greeted the audience and explained that she is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in magical engineering. She explained that magical engineering is based on mathematics and science and would give a short lecture on the topic today. The dean noted that Christina's lectures would be incredibly useful for students, as her knowledge and experiments are closely related to everyday life. Christina promised that students would be able to look forward to her classes, because science manifests itself in every phenomenon around her and makes learning engaging. During her demonstrations, she showed unexpected effects, such as lightly pushing the dean to demonstrate power and its effect on objects. As a result, the dean lost his balance and fell to the floor, and Christina continued her experiments, clearly demonstrating how physical laws operate even in such cases. The girl explained that they would now see the reaction of different substances to each other and intended to use water to make the demonstration more visual. She emphasized that this is a lesson in gravity, where every object is subject to physical laws, and even simple movement becomes a clear illustration of science. The dean couldn't understand her actions, and Christina explained that the lecture was in full swing, and his role was simply to observe the process and record details. She then gently slapped him across the face, demonstrating the principle of counteraction and the importance of following the laws of physics in every demonstration for clarity. The girl noted that this is an illustration of the law of action and reaction, which applies to all objects, regardless of their size or force of impact. The students were amazed, because the lecture included such unusual experiments that they had never seen before, and what was happening seemed truly amazing to them. It was also captivating that listeners were trying to figure out how Christina came up with such methods and what other experiments might follow in the future. In another experiment, she grabbed the dean by the hair, demonstrating that objects continue to move as long as forces act on them, and this became a clear example of mechanics. The girl applied force, and the dean's head shifted sharply, showing how momentum passes through the body and how easily the laws of motion can be demonstrated in practice. She then threw it far away so the students could see the trajectory of the movement and understand that force, speed, and direction are interconnected in every movement. As a result, the dean flew through the auditorium and out the window, which clearly demonstrated the movement of the projectile and the reaction of objects to the force acting on them in reality. Christina explained that this is a classic example of projectile motion, where the laws of physics become obvious and students gain practical experience through visual aids. The class was fun and engaging, the lecture structure made the material easy to digest, and the unique demonstrations made the lesson interesting and memorable. The girl noted that there is hidden science in every phenomenon, and it is important to notice it even in ordinary actions, because knowledge can be applied in everyday life. At the Academy, students study laws and create magical tools that help solve practical problems, making work easier and life more convenient. Christina demonstrated a recently patented, powerful tool designed for complex manipulations, facilitating many processes in experimental magic. To work with it, you need a special set of tools and brushes to carefully control the magical mechanism and avoid mistakes when using it. She applied glue to the card and walked up to the dean, demonstrating how the tool could be used to secure objects, demonstrating magical science in practice. She then taped a card to his face with the humorous message that he was trash, showing how magical actions could be used with precision and effect. The dean didn't fully understand why this was necessary, but Christina explained that it was part of an experiment and that it was important to use tools for visual learning for students. The girl added that she successfully completed the task and showed the students how to operate magical instruments, making the process safe and demonstrative. Despite the engaging lecture, she noted that the work requires attention and patience, and each demonstration is the result of painstaking preparation. The students were delighted, and the only victim was the dean, who constantly expressed his dissatisfaction and surprise at what was happening with loud enthusiasm. Although Christina became attached to the Academy, she understood that her path lay beyond its walls, and decided to leave the walls of the educational institution to move towards new goals. The girl boarded a carriage heading to the Empire, ready for new challenges and adventures, where important events and meetings that could change her life awaited her. The medicine cabinet was interested in Christina's plans for the future, as opportunities were opening up ahead to implement ideas that required courage, decisive action, and proactivity. She intended to go into big business to influence the prince with money, or try her hand at politics, using her charm and negotiating skills. However, Christina understood that she did not understand these aspects because she knew how to spend money, but had no experience in earning it or planning a financial strategy. She also noted that she does not have the necessary network of connections, so political activity is not yet available, despite understanding how to conduct negotiations. The first aid kit decided to clarify what Christina really wanted to do, and she admitted that she had to think about whether to openly tell her family about what had happened. The bird showed curiosity, wondering how serious her words and plans were, watching the girl's reaction and trying to understand what she really wanted to achieve. 6 years later, Christina unexpectedly appeared at the Duke's residence, causing surprise and interest, as her return was sudden and unpredictable. She said she had experienced a regression and knew that the prince was planning to destroy the family, although she did not yet know all the details, which added drama and tension to the visit. The bird believed that no one would believe her words, and Christina agreed that she herself would hardly have believed them as a child, since she was often disobedient and willful. As a child, she caused trouble for her family, highlighting the character of a rebellious girl who was able to create chaos and break rules, acting on her own volition. Being a girl with a difficult character, Christina slammed doors, creating noise and quarrels, gradually forming a gloomy and wayward personality, setting an example for others. However, her immediate plan was to work with the family, using her skills and knowledge to bring order and help her loved ones. Tichka noted that Christina's notoriety and her past are still a concern, and this could become an obstacle to the complete trust of others. Christina Freeley actually felt the same way as everyone else, so she had a carefully thought-out plan of action to resolve the situation. Her plan was to help a man who was considered the prince's sworn enemy, and at the same time to take revenge for past grievances using cunning methods. Before the prince could destroy her family, Christina and her allies intended to act preemptively, enlisting the help of someone else to ensure the success of their plan. When Christina first heard her cousin Melissa's words, she didn't immediately understand the meaning of what was said, and her thoughts swirled around how crazy the prince must be. However, thanks to her original abilities and strategic thinking, Christina was able to take complete control of the situation, leaving no chance for the enemy to surprise. She was determined that her enemy's enemy could become her ally, and she would do her utmost to sort this matter out. Acting with caution and calculation, Christina planned to provide assistance not only to her ally, but also to her family, understanding that her actions would be active and would directly influence the course of events. The guy was shocked when he learned that Christina was returning to the Empire, because no one expected such a sudden decision after her long absence. Even more surprising was how suddenly and swiftly she decided to return, without warning anyone in advance or discussing the details. Christina even filed an application to cancel the patents that were registered in the name of the Academy in order to take control of all important documents and rights. As a result, the Academy descended into complete chaos, with staff confused and unsure of how to proceed or what to do with the new orders. He became extremely interested in finding out what exactly had happened at the Academy and how such drastic actions could have affected the situation within the institution. The man explained that the place was so closed that he did not have full information, and that a similar academy certainly did not expect such events. Considering that Christina's path lay towards the capital, it became clear that she was heading straight to the residence of the Duke, her father, to settle family affairs. The opportunity to finally leave the remote place and stop immersing herself solely in research attracted her, and she decided to act without delay. He couldn't say exactly what awaited her, but an inner feeling told him that the events would be important and would change the usual order of things. He hoped that after a long separation, he would finally be able to meet her and discuss everything that had accumulated during their absence from each other. The imperial capital was located next to the Freeley estate, and from there one could see the magnificent estate of her family, surrounded by green gardens and ponds. The summoned creature, a bird, was delighted to finally be able to see the estate from above, appreciating the scale and beauty of the surrounding area. He noticed that they were almost there, but Christina suddenly grabbed him, demonstrating determination and a complete lack of intention to let him act on his own. Christina stated that he couldn't just go home because she had a special mission for him, and he had to deliver an extremely important item to a specific location. He didn't understand why she considered him a servant because the summoned creatures were more like friends than subordinates, and he didn't want to do work against his will. However, Christina explained that he was obliged to follow her instructions because his mistress was no longer Melissa, but Christina, and her decisions were mandatory. He began to object, claiming that Christina was too strict and an evil mistress who was impossible to please, and that her demands were too harsh for him. But Christina was adamant, insisting that, regardless of everything, she was in charge of this delivery, and without her participation, the task would not be completed. He noted that the task would take at least a week to complete, and noted that the secret of the delivery could be revealed if they proceeded slowly and without due caution. Christina reminded that summoned creatures have unique abilities, and the Piaga has the special ability to make secret deliveries over short distances quickly and accurately. Covert delivery was an ability that allowed the Piagi to transport small items a short distance in about a week, making it indispensable in the mission. In any case, he had to deliver the item to the mailbox as quickly as possible, using every means possible to avoid delaying the process and attracting unnecessary attention. The bird began to complain that his owner was heartless and too demanding, as if she did not care about his comfort and was solely focused on fulfilling her own plans. He said that he had suffered a lot of mental trauma from the actions of his new owner, and now his emotional state had suffered greatly, causing him to feel depressed. It seemed that his soul had suffered a serious shock and was left almost defenseless against Christina's demands and harsh decisions, which greatly worried him. After this, Christina turned to him again, demonstrating calm and confidence, as if her words could change his perception of the situation. She explained that souls do not have capillaries, which means that physical or emotional bruises cannot affect them the same way as the body. Therefore, his mental suffering and apparent trauma could not cause real damage, and Christina tried to convince him that he was misjudging his feelings. The bird took offense and turned away from her, not wanting to listen to her explanations, continuing to believe that Christina's demands were too harsh and unfair. He even stated that he hoped for the complete collapse of the magical engineering that had created such a system of subordination, and dreamed of its disappearance as the source of his suffering. The ducal estate of Frele looked majestic and austere, like a symbol of the family's power, in which every detail reflected the status and strength of this family. Christina had indeed returned, although her past was associated with memories that did not always evoke pleasant emotions, but now she intended to act decisively. The maids were astonished to see Lady Christina, and their reactions showed a mixture of surprise, alarm, and admiration at her sudden appearance at the estate. They did not understand the purpose for which she had returned, and began to move quickly towards her, trying to anticipate her intentions and understand how to behave in the new situation. The servant said they were very sorry for the disorder in the estate after the attempted murder, and that the situation remained tense and required careful handling. On the day of her return, one of her grandfather's maids attempted to assassinate her with a poisoned dagger, but Frele proved too skilled and powerful a target, and the assassination attempt failed. Christina reassured everyone, saying that there was no need to make a fuss or alarm about the incident, because she simply intended to rest after a long and tiring journey. The next day, she was going to visit her grandfather and was genuinely glad that she wouldn't have to deal with him immediately after returning to the estate. However, avoiding awkward encounters does not solve problems, and Christina understood that she would still have to establish contact and discuss important matters with her grandfather. She needed to get closer to him, warn him about her plans, and prepare for the upcoming meeting in order to jointly resolve issues related to the family. Grandfather remained the only person she could trust because he was the head of the family and had power and influence on decisions within the estate. He was shocked to learn that Christina had already arrived, not expecting her return and unaware of her intentions to act on her own. She announced that she was tired and was going to rest, wanting to recuperate from her travels, which caused a mixture of relief and surprise in her grandfather. She promised to meet him the next day, and grandfather was surprised at how suddenly she arrived, without prior notice or warning. He had absolutely no idea what was happening and tried to piece together all the events to predict his granddaughter's next steps and their consequences for the family. Earlier, at 16, Christina often locked herself in her room for several days before leaving, completely immersed in her thoughts and plans, distancing herself from her family. When she went out, her demeanor was harsh and ruthless, especially towards Melissa, with whom she had once clashed and did not miss an opportunity to show her superiority. Her grandfather watched his granddaughter become increasingly withdrawn and detached, and realized that getting close to her was becoming more and more difficult with each passing year. Even when she left for the academy and did not return for a long time, he felt emptiness and anxiety, trying to understand how to influence her future decisions and actions. He believed that he could have regained her favor if he had not scolded her then, and he supposed that his strict measures had really left a mark on her character. However, Christina admitted that she deserved the scolding, so she had to be left alone, and she now hated this place as much as before, maintaining an internal distance. Grandfather Scary Freli couldn't understand what irritated Christina so much about this place. For him, it was an environment of familiar luxury, power, and order, but his granddaughter sensed something entirely different here. The mother was a woman who abandoned her children to pursue her own business. The father ran away from the family, and the eldest girl was too preoccupied with her own concerns to keep up with her capricious teenage grandchildren. Alex, the older brother, was known for his crazy energy and was always swinging his sword, which added chaos to the family life. His presence was always felt, but he was sometimes unpredictable. The second brother, Joshua, was handsome and stylish, but harbored a hidden meanness. Despite his attractive appearance, his actions often caused inconvenience and anxiety to Christina and other family members. Melissa, Christina's cousin, had a sweet smile, but behind it often lurked devious intentions. She knew how to stab someone in the back with precision and stealth, leaving a trail of intrigue. Grandfather advised Christina to stop talking about these things. He believed that discussing petty intrigues and grievances would be useless, and that it would be better to focus on more serious matters. Hearing this, it became clear that the home environment was not at all suitable for raising children who were expected to be well-adjusted, independent, and self-confident in the future. Essentially, the family was left with only wealth, power, honor, and status. Everything else, emotions, trust, and mutual understanding, faded into the background and did not create a safe environment for Christina. However, her return meant that Christina's opinion had changed. This time, her grandfather decided to have a real conversation with her, to find out her thoughts and understand how things were in real life. He was informed that Alex had gone to search for the maid's relatives, trying to find out who was behind the recent assassination attempt. He was searching for answers while simultaneously trying to protect his family. The letter was sent to Lord Julius. It seemed that for the investigation to be successful, they would need to draw on his insight and experience in such matters to understand their enemies' motives. Grandfather also asked for a smart maid to be assigned to Christina. He wanted her to be close to her granddaughter and be able to spot any oddities or dangers in a timely manner. The maid had to report any unusual behavior immediately, and her assignment had to be immediate, so that Christina felt supported and in control, even if she didn't realize it. Grandpa added that he was going to take a short stroll around the greenhouse. He wanted to take a break from the family bustle, check on the plants, and find some peace before another busy day. Suddenly, he heard voices. It was the summoned being Pyagi. Its appearance was always accompanied by strange sensations and vague premonitions that could not be ignored. It seemed as if the nightmare he'd seen at the estate was repeating itself, vivid and disturbing. Each vision was saturated with dread and a premonition of something terrible and inevitable. This vision featured his mother, crying and fainting. The scene was so real and painful that it left my grandfather feeling anxious and vulnerable. But things didn't end there. Marquis César Levin awarded a major new research grant. He saw potential in the family and tried to encourage Christina's work. Professor Christina was specifically mentioned. Her talents and abilities were essential to the research, and grandfather understood that without her participation, much could be missed. She found herself in a situation where leaving her family was impossible. Circumstances required her presence, and visiting others was out of the question for now, adding to the tension. Seriously, the nightmares continued to appear, bringing with them anxiety and worry. Even the most familiar places became the source of disturbing memories and dreams. Christina woke up the next morning after these nightmares. She remained anxious, but gradually she pulled herself together, preparing to face the new day and cope with the events that had unfolded. A maid, surprisingly muscular and attentive, was assigned to her bedside. Her presence inspired a sense of security, but also a reminder of strict rules and surveillance. Christina asked about her grandfather, and the maid informed her that the Duke had gone to bed at dawn, so he would likely not wake until after lunch. This meant she would have to act independently in the morning. She also noted that the senior and junior lords, as well as Lady Melissa, were currently absent. Christina knew the morning would be quiet, but she braced herself for possible surprises. Last night, a slew of letters arrived from the academy. Christina decided to simply throw them away, considering them empty fuss and not wanting to distract her from more important matters and family matters. She felt unwell, so she decided to have coffee for breakfast. Besides, Christina knew she needed to get ready for her trip, think through her plans, and prepare for the upcoming meetings. The maid warned that drinking coffee on an empty stomach could be harmful. This was important advice given Christina's condition, but her granddaughter understood that she would have to make her own decisions. Christina knew her grandfather had placed her under surveillance, and the maid was supposed to keep an eye on her. However, the granddaughter understood the need to listen to advice, even if it wasn't always pleasant. Then Christina realized her grandfather had indeed sent a spy after her. This confirmed his concern, but at the same time it irritated her slightly, as she valued her personal freedom. The maid immediately apologized, and Christina replied that everything was fine. She understood that the girl needed a job and was patient and understanding so as not to create tension. The maid was surprised that Christina had no plans to hire another assistant. Her granddaughter, however, couldn't understand why she'd replace the already appointed, attentive, and resourceful girl who could be useful. Christina decided to grab some coffee and head to 12th Street. She knew she had a busy day ahead, and every step required a clear plan and mental focus. The maid asked again, and Christina carefully cleared her ears. She wanted the girl to understand her words correctly and be prepared for any unexpected events or orders. Christina reminded her that the maid should always listen to her, remain attentive, and be prepared for any situation. This strengthened the bond of control and understanding between them. She also noted that she was planning to visit her second brother, known for his mischievous nature and provocative behavior. The meeting promised to be difficult, but necessary. The story revolved around Joshua, a perpetual teenager who created chaos and made life difficult for his family. His personality required Christina's careful approach and attention. After a while, the maid announced that everything was ready. The house was tidied up, and Christina could leave without worrying about minor household details, focusing on the important matters. She also asked if Christina was happy with the checkered pattern on her dress for the evening. A harmonious look was important to her granddaughter's confidence. Christina replied that everything was fine, and the current plan was fine. Her goal for today was to meet her grandfather and get closer to him, strengthening family ties and improving communication. Christina understood that for a healthy family relationship, it was important to start with something kind. She tried to compensate for all the troubles her grandfather and others had caused her in the past by choosing kind deeds. Summoned creature Skari Frelaya, How, had the ability to absorb poison and purify it. This made him indispensable in dangerous situations where any family member could be threatened. Oddly, after Christina left the academy, How hadn't appeared. Until then, his presence had remained rare and mysterious, as if he'd vanished from view. Later, when Grandpa and Melissa were arrested for treason, How emerged in such a state he could barely stand. His body and energy were drained, as if he had been through something extremely dangerous. Something momentous must have happened while Christina was at the academy. These events left a deep mark on How, on his condition and actions of which she was not yet aware. Perhaps he absorbed the deadly poison so intensely that he was unable to fully cope with it, let alone purify it. This would explain his weakness and rare appearances. Christina had about 6 hours before her meeting with her grandfather that day. She carefully planned every step to ensure she had time to prepare and make the visit as smooth as possible. But now she was ready to go out at exactly 12 o'clock. She understood that time was limited, and she wanted to greet her grandfather looking her best, confident and determined. When Christina arrived, she noticed that passers-by were adorned from head to toe with luxurious items. This created a strange feeling, as if the city had become a display of wealth. If you put everything you saw together, you could probably buy your own house. The amazing things people wore were striking and emphasized the scale of wealth around them. They once again attracted attention and made headlines in Laura's newspaper. Events surrounding the family became a constant topic of discussion and rumor, heightening public interest. Christina's second brother, Joshua, was there. Everyone even showed affection for the snake holding his hand. This creature, though unusual, aroused the admiration of those around him. Everyone knew this summoned creature belonged to the Frelai family. Its origins and ties to the family were obvious, and everyone understood that it was part of the family magic. Considering how Joshua managed to cope at such a young age, perhaps the creature's ability was to sniff out money, finding wealth where no one expected it. Perhaps this was dirty money that the duchy failed to protect. Wrapping oneself in luxury seems to have become a way to gain the approval of others through material manifestations. However, Joshua was completely shocked when he saw the Frelay duchy's carriage. He couldn't understand why it was there, or what exactly brought Christina to this place at this moment. He had no idea why Christina had appeared here now. It was unexpected, and Joshua tried to piece together the events that had led to her sudden appearance. It seemed Alex had come to threaten or punish him. His intentions were clear, and Joshua sensed the situation could quickly spiral out of control. And then he saw Christina coming out. It was already late, but despite the circumstances, she seemed to be congratulating him on managing this on his own, showing care and attention. Joshua couldn't believe it was his little sister standing in front of him. He was amazed that she had changed and become confident over the years, but she was still the same Christina he knew. She noted that Joshua lived like a low-class, get-rich-quick man seeking attention. Her words highlighted the contrast between his lifestyle and his mother's money habits. Christina gave him a housewarming gift, a vase with a checkered pattern. It was symbolic, beautiful, and unusual, highlighting her attention to detail and understanding of her brother's tastes. She explained that he didn't fully understand the beauty of right angles, but the vase looked beautiful, like a coordinate plane. Her words added a slightly philosophical note to the gift. Ignorance is not a crime. Christina reminded her brother that mistakes or ignorance don't make a person bad, and that everyone has the right to their own preferences and views. Afterwards, she picked up the book and threw it in someone's face. It was a gesture full of determination and symbolism, directed at the person who had criticized or doubted them. She clarified that this was the very person who spoke about an inferiority complex and other shortcomings. Christina made it clear who deserved such a reaction for their words. Her brother enjoyed the luxury their family's status brought them. This reflected his personal preferences and habits, allowing Christina to understand his approach to life and wealth. These were purely his personal tastes. He valued convenience and comfort, and his actions had no hidden meaning, simply expressing his individual preferences. Christina also emphasized that no one should make up stories about other people's circumstances. She sought to protect the family from gossip and ill will from others. When they arrived, they did all this out of envy. Christina understood that the motives of those around her were selfish and envious, and she tried to preserve the family's dignity despite this. Trying to speak calmly in front of people after a long break was extremely nerve-wracking for Christina. She had to compose herself and control her emotions to project confidence and composure. She was close to the newspaper's editor-in-chief, and that gave her confidence. Only those who were open about it dared insult Joshua, knowing the consequences would be immediate. Only if someone didn't want their personal belongings to become the subject of public ridicule did they keep their mouths shut. This created a fine line between safety and risk. Joshua suggested they simply go inside, since he hadn't seen his sister for 6 years. He wanted to calmly reconnect and understand how Christina had changed in that time. When they entered the living room, Christina practically screamed in amazement. She assessed the amount of money invested in the furnishings, marveling at the wealth and luxury around her. Joshua noted that the pillow was a limited edition, which someone like Christina with no sense of style wouldn't even notice. He smiled quietly at her reaction. In any case, Joshua hadn't changed. Despite the years, his character, habits, and demeanor remained the same, evoking a mixture of surprise and warmth in Christina. Even with his terrible speech, communicating with him always brought good fortune. Christina knew her brother was capable of support and understanding, and this made her meetings with him special. He also noted that he was curious about when she arrived in the capital. Joshua wanted to learn about her life, her adaptation, and her impressions of new places and events. Christina noted that he knew everything since he was the editor-in-chief and her deputy. His snake, golden and intelligent, watched them, demonstrating unusual abilities. This snake is a recognized creature capable of transforming into a human form. Its uniqueness amazed and delighted, emphasizing the magical component of the Frelai family. She'd heard that Vlad, the newspaper driver, was a green-haired, green-eyed girl. Her appearance and personality created an impression that was immediately memorable to those around her. Grandpa and Alex ordered their immediate resignation. This decision was unexpected and decisive, demonstrating the importance of discipline and following family orders. Joshua resolutely left his home, leaving the past behind. Now he lives a peaceful and successful life, enjoying freedom and the absence of old obligations. He knew of her arrival in advance, having received word of her intentions the previous evening. It seemed the entire capital knew of this event, and his knowledge was complete. Despite this, she appeared faster than he expected. Joshua was surprised by her decisiveness, not expecting her to rush toward him so quickly and without hesitation. The main reason for her visit was that she had 2 important matters which required immediate discussion with him and would not tolerate delay. Joshua noticed her confidence and impudence, realizing that when she found out the details, she would immediately leave. But he had no doubt that she knew how to act decisively. She asked him what he thought about his summoned beings falling ill. He admitted that he would rather bear their suffering himself than see them suffer. These creatures came into their world solely for their sake, and by their nature they should not experience suffering because they were created to help and protect. If someone could cure a sick summoned creature, even if it was Alex, he would generously thank such a person, enveloping them in attention and care. Christina understood his position and expressed gratitude for his opinion, noting that she appreciated his perspective on the situation, but did not intend to interfere unnecessarily. In reality, everything turned out to be simpler than she imagined. She realized that the problem would be easier to solve if she approached it calmly and rationally, without unnecessary emotions. Since she couldn't summon the creature on her own, her visit was necessary to confirm some important details and clarify the nuances of the process. Joshua inquired whether there were ways to completely cure a sick summoned creature, since no specialist specialized in this type of treatment. Christina reassured him, explaining that there was no need to worry and that it was none of his concern, as her intervention was limited and controlled. He noticed that the situation looked suspicious, since Christina usually did not interfere in family affairs. But she did not see anything strange in this, since they were practically strangers. They both understood that helping each other was the natural order of things, especially when it came to the safety and well-being of loved ones and summoned beings. When Christina pushed Joshua away, he felt a slight confusion, as if he was choking on his own emotions, not expecting such a reaction from her. He clarified whether it was really Christina, since her friendly comments on family matters had confused him and made him doubt her true intentions. He suggested that there might be someone else in her body now, because her behavior and manners seemed unusual for her, different from her usual character. Joshua thought that perhaps another soul had entered her, which would explain her unexpected behavior and unusual emotional reactions to ordinary things. He added that if Christina was not pretending, then she would have to reveal to him a secret known only to them, one that no one else could know about. Christina admitted that the secret she keeps with her brother does exist, but it is unrelated to the current situation and does not threaten anyone. She also emphasized that there is nothing romantic between her and her brother and asked Joshua not to take their closeness for anything more than it actually is. They had never been particularly close, and her words were meant to dispel his fantasies about the romantic stories he had been accustomed to reading since childhood. At that moment, he realized that it was indeed Christina in front of him, and any doubts about her true identity disappeared, leaving a feeling of relief and trust. Christina, in turn, thought that he was truly unusual and evoked strong emotions in her, combining determination and care at the same time. She insisted that Joshua stop being overly cautious and simply answer her specific question, without getting distracted by guesswork and unnecessary emotions. He agreed to her request, promising to listen carefully to her questions and give honest and thoughtful answers without unnecessary commentary. Christina expressed interest in learning more about the Crown Prince, wanting to know more about his position, status, and possible connections to their family and empire. Joshua admitted that he had not expected such a question from her, and was somewhat surprised that Christina had suddenly become interested in the fate of the Crown Prince. He added that he found it difficult to understand the reasons for her sudden interest, since before this, she had not usually shown such curiosity in political matters. But he explained that he knew more than usual. 6 years ago, the Crown Prince went hunting with his retinue, which became a key event that changed many things. During this hunt, he fell from a cliff and disappeared without a trace. The Crown Prince's disappearance caused alarm in the imperial palace, and the emperor himself fell seriously ill from the stress. Prince Heaton, who was next in line for succession, took his place, preparing to assume responsibility for the throne, which was now in doubt. However, the emperor stated that the throne would remain vacant until he personally confirmed the fate of the Crown Prince and gave an official order. Joshua said that he didn't know anything else for now, and promised to tell Christina any new information if it appeared and was of interest to her. Furthermore, Christina wanted him to find out if there was a connection between their family and the Crown Prince, in order to understand how events could affect their situation. Christina noticed that he was clearly unhappy with the current situation, and this immediately caught her eye, because his facial expression revealed hidden anxiety and tension. Now his face expressed a mixture of concern and helplessness, as if he could not act like an older brother and suddenly began to worry about his younger sister. His anxiety was heightened by the thought that Christina's interference in royal affairs could create new problems and complicate the already difficult situation in the empire. Ultimately, he was genuinely concerned about her safety and understood that her actions would require close monitoring to prevent any possible complications. Christina believed that her older brother had no reason to worry about her actions because she was capable of handling the difficulties and decisions that arose on her own, and he was not obliged to control everything. He, on the contrary, was sure that it was enough to simply ask her to refrain from risky actions, and she herself would change her behavior, without requiring him to interfere in her life. Grandfather and Alex watched the events from their own vantage points, each assessing the situation in their own way, as one of them had a particular dislike for the newspaper, which sometimes reached the point of genuine passion. But the matter was not limited to the prestige of the Hertzian house. Traditions, the family's reputation, and the personal safety of everyone associated with this powerful family were at stake. The Fraley family had 2 sons, an elder and a younger, and each of them played a role in shaping the family's future, as well as the path Christina chose in life. The eldest son became the father of Christina and her brothers, responsible for their upbringing, education, and future, and his presence was felt in every aspect of family life. The second son, Christina's uncle, fell in love with a commoner and left home long ago, choosing his own feelings and freedom over the duties imposed by family traditions. When Christina was just 5 years old, her mother left, leaving only a short note, and secretly left the house in the middle of the night with the coachman, changing her daughter's life forever. During her escape, she fell while trying to escape the pursuing knights, and her life was tragically cut short, leaving Christina with the pain of loss and a feeling of emptiness. Later, Christina's father, having changed into something resembling a human being, went to the Northern Duchy, leaving his family and home, hoping to find answers or escape a personal tragedy he could not cope with. He went hunting in the Northern Islands and never returned, leaving behind a void in which Christina and her brothers gradually learned to live without their parents' presence. The problems didn't stop there. Christina had inherited her mother's pink hair and green eyes, making her look like the woman who had left the family many years ago. In addition, she was the only one in the family who did not have a presumed being, and this created enormous psychological pressure on her, forcing her to constantly prove her worth. When Christina thought back to these events, she realized that she was the only one who had suffered then, and perhaps that was why her upbringing and growing up were so difficult for all three of them. She later addressed her brother, explaining that congratulations on gaining independence back then meant recognition of his efforts and self-affirmation, and not just a formality. From early childhood, Christina secretly studied books and magical tools in the Duke's mansion, gradually mastering knowledge that allowed her to understand the hidden mechanisms of magic. She even asked her brother if he knew what she was working on back then. A magical golden instrument that could change the color of her eyes was her secret passion and experiment. Doubts about whether she truly belonged to the Freyli family tormented her, creating constant internal tension and forcing her to seek confirmation of her authenticity. If only there was a way to verify Christina's origins, she would be relieved to know the outcome, as sometimes it felt like she was doing something completely unnecessary to prove herself. She believed that this was not at all necessary, and it did not matter that others called her a disgrace to the family, because her inner efforts and desire for knowledge were more significant than other people's condemnation. Christina managed to develop a talent for magical engineering and was close to becoming a professor, demonstrating that her abilities could be of great benefit to the world of magic. Thanks to this, she believed that all the trials and difficulties she had to go through were not in vain, because they strengthened her character and ability to make difficult decisions. Joshua was amazed when he heard her story, not expecting that behind the outwardly calm and confident girl there was so much pain, aspirations, and inner experiences hidden. He couldn't remember the exact details, but he knew how closely his parents were connected to her story, and it left a deep imprint on him, evoking strong emotions and empathy. Joshua hated all forms of marital infidelity, and the realization of what her parents had gone through was an unbearable ordeal for him, which he took extremely painfully. She explained that such situations were common, and this is what prompted him to investigate high society scandals, where, to his surprise, he quickly discovered interesting facts. He began work on the newspaper, determined to expose all those involved in adultery, and he devoted all his intellect and courage to the implementation of this ambitious project. His project eventually became a sensation, attracting enormous public attention, and Joshua, in particular, thanks to chance circumstances and the intervention of his grandfather, learned a lot about the past of the Hertz house. Christina was able to learn details of their backstory, which allowed her to gain a deeper understanding of the family's motives and the reasons behind the many hidden conflicts that surrounded their lives. Joshua also had a strong dislike for his father and understood that he was fighting for his mother. But his methods and decisions caused him deep resentment and internal struggle. But he could not ignore the objections of others and had to push into the danger zone, despite the risks, to achieve his goals and understand the true state of affairs. He didn't even think about how his parents had abandoned him and the 3 children who were left without proper guidance, which made him feel misunderstood and disappointed in their actions. He couldn't understand how people could be so irresponsible, leaving chaos and suffering in their wake, and this strengthened his determination to fix the situation himself. Grandfather advised his firstborn to clear his mind a little and suggested conquering the northern monster, believing that this test would help him gain confidence and overcome his inner fears. The reason Grandpa and Alex disapproved of Joshua's actions was not because of family pride, but because they believed he had not yet recovered from old wounds and past failures. Alex insisted that Joshua leave and take care of his own life, without interfering in the family's affairs, and allowed the situation to develop naturally, without undue control. Christina, however, argued that if he failed to complete the task, his father would be punished, meaning Joshua's actions were important to protect the family and uphold justice. Although their views differed, Christina saw the situation differently and believed that sometimes intervention and effort may seem unnecessary, but in fact have great significance for the future. Joshua had come this far because he had talent and ability, and even if it all started because of a past that seemed meaningless, his actions had the potential to create a meaningful future. If he continues to follow his own path, it will become his personal choice and mission, showing that the ability to act and solve problems is more important than external assessments and condemnations. Christina remembered this and continued to support him despite the gossip and dirty magazines, understanding that the true value of Joshua's actions was not in public opinion, but in his personal mission. Evolutionary intuition sometimes showed through in Joshua's actions, and perhaps Christina should have praised him a little more warmly, acknowledging the effort and determination he demonstrated. Even if he behaves like a naughty teenager all his life, it will leave an imprint on the heart of his grandfather, who is accustomed to discipline and order, and it will be difficult to change the habit of seeing him as a child, even as the years go by. He earns more than enough for himself, his wealth is impressive, and one can only congratulate him on having developed a love for luxury items and appreciating them while enjoying a refined life. She also noted that the awareness of one's own strength and responsibility is a good thing. And at this point, there was a pause, when everyone around seemed to freeze in silence, assessing what was said. Christina decided it was time to go, realizing that her time in this house and communication with him was coming to an end, and that further actions depended only on her. She returned the pillow he had been lying on, but he insisted that she keep it for herself, as if it were part of an exchange of care and a symbol of respect between them. She noticed that the pillow was soft and comfortable, and this gave her confidence that even small things can bring warmth and comfort if treated with care. As a token of gratitude, she gave him a vase, and this became a symbol of the fact that their mutual gifts are a way to express care and attention, each in their own way. He also told her to remember that her family and honor did not depend on her misdeeds, but on him, and that her role should not be a cause for shame or worry. He emphasized that such things are not determined only by appearance or frivolous behavior. Dealing with her is not easy, but it also brings more worries than expected. After that, he did not understand why she was silent, believing that her heart should have stopped from what she said. But Christina remained calm, trying not to show her emotions. As they parted, Christina asked him to take care of himself and remember what she had asked earlier, as if leaving a piece of herself in his thoughts and hopes for the future. He looked at her with a displeased expression, clearly puzzled why she was not responding in the usual way. And this look was at once stern and interested. After that, he turned to her again, as if trying to catch the slightest sign of her thoughts and understand what she really wanted, even without words and obvious signs. He noted that he wondered why she didn't simply leave the running of the empire to her grandfather, so that her concerns could be focused on her personal life rather than on state affairs. He also mentioned that the emperor would soon die and the crown prince would ascend the throne, foreshadowing changes that would affect them all and which should be watched with particular attention. The situation of the missing crown prince seemed pointless, as nothing significant had happened in the past 6 years, and questions of succession remained merely theoretical. He noticed that Christina still looked unusual, as if her appearance reflected her inner experiences, difficulties, and years spent away from her normal life. He asked what was wrong with her, noting her thinness, which was disturbing, as if she was carrying not only a physical but also an emotional burden. Her complexion was pale and unhealthy, and Christina admitted that he had always been like that, but now it bothered him more than ever, causing him a feeling of unexpected concern. He suddenly became worried, but he could limit himself to just internal reflection, without showing violent emotions, as if trying to keep his feelings under control so as not to embarrass her. For 6 years, he had never bothered to contact her, and so it seemed strange that he was now suddenly concerned about her condition, even though she was leaving soon and their paths would diverge. He was surprised because before he was in no hurry to get involved with her. But now every action of hers caused attention and questions, as if she had become an important part of his thoughts for no apparent reason. Every month he sent letters to check on her, but her ignoring her irritated him. At the same time, he found this behavior strange and incomprehensible. Even letters asking him to return on special occasions remained unanswered, and this created a tension that he could not explain rationally, but felt with all his heart. She also ignored messages every time that she would not attend the academy, as if she was deliberately keeping her distance and not allowing anyone to interfere in her affairs. She hadn't invited him to her first thesis presentation, and now he had to follow her to understand what was going on and perhaps offer support or influence. It seemed that something was wrong, and this time he needed to approach her and have a serious talk, so he decided to return to the house to prepare for the conversation and think about his words. The sun should have set today, but it seemed to be moving back to the west, creating a strange light and atmosphere suitable for reflection and preparation for an important conversation. The coachman asked the lady if she was returning home, but Christina said that she was going to the store to buy something important, despite the upcoming worries and fatigue. The maid understood that imperial affairs were dangerous, but her level of anxiety seemed excessive. Everyone around her noticed how carefully Christina treated both her duties and herself. They never showed much interest in her, so she thought they didn't care, and that's what allowed her to maintain inner independence and autonomy in her decisions. She sent letters asking him to come, but they all remained unanswered, creating a feeling of detachment and uselessness that sometimes weighed heavily on her. If all the worries were left to the old and sick grandfather, as Joshua suggested, the consequences could be dire, and the family would again find itself in a crisis situation with no way out. The entire family could once again find itself on the brink if someone did not take responsibility for the fate of the empire, and this understanding made her cautious and attentive to every step. To say that searching for a populated area is pointless is also wrong. When she was 13, she was told that she would live with Melissa, and this decision shaped her future. Melissa was the same age as Christina, and they should have gotten along like sisters, the daughter of an uncle who had long since left home, creating the basis for a close relationship for them. After the death of her parents, Christina Freeley was taken to her grandfather, Skari, along with her cousin Melissa, who was the same age as Christina, to live under his care and study in the atmosphere of the Tylus Empire. Despite being a member of a collateral branch of the family, Christina possessed a rare gift, the ability to summon magical creatures, which made her unique even among her own family. Since the day Melissa first received the summoned creature, Christina had a strange dream every night where her own bird would scream and hint at a connection with Melissa's creature, causing anxiety. Whenever Christina encountered Melissa, she would be overcome with strange, conflicting feelings, and one day she demanded that her sister remove the seeds from the strawberries, displaying a bossy and irritated attitude. Gradually, Christina began to accuse Melissa of stealing her pie, leading herself to internal struggle and torment, especially when both reached the age of 16, experiencing tension between themselves. One night, Christina decided to take a desperate step. She attacked Melissa with a knife, but her attempt was stopped, and she realized that her actions were too dangerous and caused discontent among those around her. Everyone around her believed that Christina had gone too far, and her actions reflected extreme emotional stress. She did indeed often allow herself to act too abruptly. However, Christina had her own goal. From the age of 13, she studied magical engineering and created a special artifact that was supposed to help her achieve her goals using magic and knowledge. The artifact was a magical instrument capable of changing eye color, although it was not originally intended to change Christina's own eyes, but served to realize her plans. Christina knew she wouldn't make a fool of herself by allowing her eye color to change accidentally. All her actions were carefully thought out and aimed at achieving a goal. From the very beginning, Melissa was the object of her plans. Christina's goal was to change the color of her sister's eyes so that no one could ever doubt her rights or merits within the family. Then no one could argue that Melissa was better suited to the role of Lady Freyley than Christina, and that gave her a sense of control and satisfaction. The artifact required the user's blood to activate, so Christina attempted to stab Melissa with a knife, seeking to carry out her plan magically. Grandpa noticed the situation and said that Melissa had indeed crossed the line, and Christina needed to understand what was right and what was wrong in order to avoid making dangerous mistakes in further actions. Christina had to think about her actions, enter a state of self-restraint, and learn to control her impulses so as not to ruin her relationships with loved ones. At that moment, she realized that if she continued in the same spirit, she would remain trapped in her own suffering and emotional pain, finding no peace in her thoughts and actions. She was suffering because of something she could never achieve. Changing the color of Melissa's eyes could no longer fix anything, and Christina realized that she had done a stupid thing and taken an unnecessary risk. She asked her grandfather to send her to the academy, hoping for a new environment and the opportunity to rethink her actions, move on from past mistakes, and gain fresh experience in learning and life. She reflected on what had happened and decided to bury the artifact forever, realizing that she would not use it anymore, so as not to repeat the same mistakes and not harm her sister. However, since she had dedicated her childhood to creating the artifact, it would have been too wasteful to simply throw it away. The tool was part of her efforts and magical experience. Later, Christina planned to think about how best to get rid of the artifact, trying to find a way to end this stage of her life without unnecessary risk and emotional stress. She clarified how much time remained until her arrival in the duchy, planning her next steps and thinking about upcoming events and opportunities for herself and her family. They seemed to have traveled quite far west, and Christina estimated the distance, taking into account that new encounters, trials, and decisions requiring attention and caution lay ahead. After this, she asked not to stop for a moment, intending to move on and not to waste precious time in order to achieve the goal and not to give in to doubts or fear. The knight warned her not to go too far, but Christina knew she needed to go that distance to test her strength and gain self-confidence. That seemed enough when suddenly she heard a voice that ordered her not to approach him, causing her confusion and instant fear of the unknown person. Christina didn't understand who was in front of her, and the feeling of anxiety grew. The unknown made her wary and assess the situation, not knowing what to trust. She almost lost consciousness, not understanding where this man came from, and felt a strange mixture of surprise and apprehension, as if the reality around her had instantly changed. He looked about her age, and from the quality of his clothes, one could guess that he belonged to the nobility, and therefore was probably the child of a rich or influential family. He repeated once again that it was not worth getting involved with him, creating a sense of mystery and caution, as if warning Christina of potential danger. She should have just pretended she hadn't noticed and moved on, but she didn't understand why he was so concerned and overly attentive to her presence. He told her to listen to him, warning that otherwise she would regret interfering in a matter that did not concern her, causing her internal conflict. Christina didn't even promise to help him, realizing that leaving him here was dangerous, and her tender heart began to have doubts about the correctness of her actions. She asked herself that if this is what he wants, then there is nothing she can do, and wished him to take care of himself, trying not to interfere in events that could be dangerous. After that, she quickly left, realizing that it was dangerous to stay nearby, and her actions were swift to avoid unnecessary problems and not put herself in danger. He was surprised that Christina left so quickly, not understanding her motivation, and her sudden speed of departure left him with mixed feelings and slight bewilderment. Christina decided to find another place where she could safely move, avoiding possible conflicts and being in a state where she could think about her next steps. At the same time, she moved very quickly, realizing that time was of the essence and that she had to act carefully, leaving no room for mistakes or pursuit. Suddenly, Christina returned to him, and the guy did not understand why she changed her mind and came back, creating tension and surprise in their meeting. There was a note of joy in the young man's voice, and he noted that he had told her not to interfere. But Christina's presence caused him mixed emotions and joy at the same time. Christina decided that he didn't need to say anything extra. She would simply leave on her own. But an idea arose in her mind that could change their interaction and the course of events. She remembered the rare magical instrument that she was about to throw away, realizing that this artifact could be useful to someone else, although it was useless to her. She thought about handing the instrument over to him. It could change the color of her eyes, and Christina knew she no longer needed its power and capabilities. She also suggested that if he needed money, he could secretly sell it somewhere, such as on the black market, where all purchases were not monitored, keeping the transaction secure. Christina realized that selling it on the black market would keep the instrument safe and useful to someone else without risking herself or exposing information. He, by the way, asked if this was true, and asked where she was able to get such a rare and valuable magical item, surprised by its rarity and capabilities. Christina remembered that one of her friends had once created this, but he was no longer in this world. And after that incident, she had noticeably changed, which made her words almost true. She explained that it was enough to think of the desired color, bringing it to the eyes, and after using the user's blood, the magic could only be used once, and the effect would resume the next day. He wondered why she was doing him this favor, and Christina replied that she was doing it only for her own peace of mind, without expecting anything in return. Leaving a wounded person in such a place is always unsettling, so she tries to give him something valuable to ease his condition a little. She doesn't need these things herself, but by giving them away, she seems to free a part of her soul and receives a little inner relief. Surprisingly, for him, it turned out to be a truly useful magical tool, capable of helping in the most difficult situations. He was sincerely grateful for her actions, realizing that it is rare to meet people who are so selflessly willing to help others. It fascinated Christina. She couldn't see a single hair on the object, but it emanated a strange, trustworthy aura. She asked why all this had happened to him, and he honestly admitted that he had been betrayed, explaining that there was nothing more to add to it. Since he had survived the betrayal, he could now take revenge himself, and therefore there was no point in worrying too much about him. Christina admitted that she didn't really feel any anxiety and didn't understand why they had gone so far during their first meeting. In any case, she decided to say goodbye to him honestly, in order to leave everything as it was, without complicating further events. She also noted that even if it sounded alarming, he shouldn't risk his life, and the Imperial Capital's mailboxes could help keep the secret. After a long time, when he can completely hide, he will inform her of his fate, whether he is alive or dead, thereby maintaining contact. Understanding the danger, Christina also decided to create her own secret email account for secure correspondence and information storage. This way, they will be able to communicate with each other without worry, knowing that no one will be able to intercept their messages. She promised to think about it, and he said that he needed to write down the mailbox number, but she suggested just remembering it and left. This was the last time she saw him in person, because then she had to hurry and take care of other important matters. Soon after, she heard news that the Imperial Crown Prince had gone hunting with his acquaintances and disappeared, falling off a cliff without a trace. The event coincided with her route, and then Christina realized that they were probably talking about the Crown Prince, whom she had definitely seen before. She had definitely met him before, remembering the sparkling silver hair that immediately made him stand out from other people. His voice, slightly hungry and demanding, was a symbol of royal power and inspired respect in everyone who heard it. Even at a young age, the presence of a swordmaster worthy of her grandfather stood before her, causing Christina to feel a mixture of admiration and apprehension. Everyone around was simply amazed when they saw this chubby, joyful little prince who radiated childish energy and power. The Crown Prince was always surrounded by those who sincerely loved and respected him, which only increased his prestige and authority. He smiled joyfully, almost constantly, embodying all the symbols of royal power and confidence that those around him so lacked. True symbols of power were visible in everything, in his appearance, his manners, and in the way other people treated him. Christina constantly heard talk about him and his achievements, which involuntarily forced her to compare herself to this image. She envied his confidence and recognition of his origins, constantly looking back at him and analyzing his every move. Above all, his cheerful demeanor reminded her of Melissa, her cousin, who had always caused Christina conflicting feelings. Her gloomy character instinctively avoided such bright and open personalities, causing internal resistance to close communication. At first glance, it seemed that they would not be able to get along, so Christina showed no interest in him and tried to keep her distance. If this boy really was the Crown Prince, there was still a possibility that they simply wouldn't recognize each other in the future. His voice and mannerisms confused her a little, making her doubt the true identity and intentions of this young prince. If he really was the Crown Prince, why didn't he ask to be taken to the palace, and why did he hide like a criminal? However, after her return, everything changed. She did not understand the reason, but at the same time, the summoned creature began to show unexpected revenge almost at the same time. The Crown Prince had mercilessly exacted revenge without revealing his identity, and since he had survived, he could now exact his revenge without any hindrance. Christina sensed the crisis caused by the Crown Prince's actions and understood that the second prince must face the consequences for the Fraley family. Christina decided to help him speed up the fulfillment of his dreams, realizing that her intervention could change the course of events in favor of her family. If she can remove the second prince from power, the Duke of Fraley's family will not be in danger of being destroyed by possible treason or palace intrigue. So, as soon as she arrived in the capital, she asked the summoned creature to deliver the letter to the mailbox, calculating the arrival time in advance in a week. She wondered when the summoned creature would return, because the success of her plan and the safety of her family depended on it. To be honest, Christina thought that everyone would believe that she had finally taken the summoned creature from Melissa, and that would strengthen her position. Ever since she bullied Melissa for thinking she was hers alone, it really has become hers, yet she must tell her family. And she became curious about how they would react, and the maid suddenly announced that they had already arrived. This is the same store that the lady was talking about. I noticed that His Highness always spoke very clearly about the princess, and emphasized that they were only using each other. Therefore, he does not understand at all why he put so much effort into choosing clothes. He said he was just afraid that if he was too persistent, then he might hear something like, "No, she's gonna leave now before they start talking," and the servant also said that if His Highness was worried about this, then the other guys should do the same. The gentleman said that he did not know the details, but in any case, he believed that it was time to go without delay. The path to where this man was located was known only to a few, and every step required caution and attention. The general store offered almost everything needed, including emergency medical care, so that no one would be left without help in a critical moment. There were also stimulants that could help a person regain strength and act faster in any circumstances. Christina took it all into her own hands, decisively putting the necessary things into the basket, understanding the importance of each item. She ordered the maid to hurry with the purchase and act as quickly as possible, because the sun was already rising high over the city. Grandfather should have woken up around now. Perhaps it was because Christina had run away after causing a lot of trouble. Meeting her grandfather face to face made her feel uneasy, but the brothers could be sure that they were truly of the same blood, like heirs to the same destiny. However, in front of her grandfather, Christina often wondered if she was really his granddaughter, because now she was no longer the same child she had been then. Suddenly, someone made a strange sound, and Christina instantly turned her head, alert and prepared for the unexpected. A nobleman appeared before her, entering the room with confidence, grace, and a calm elegance that immediately attracted attention. She saw before her a man with an expressive appearance, facial features that combined severity and attractiveness at the same time. He was dressed impeccably, and his blue hair added an unusual, almost magical charisma, and made his image mysterious and memorable. Christina couldn't immediately understand what exactly she was seeing, because 6 years ago, such people were almost never seen in the capital. She looked at him carefully, trying to understand who this man was and what role he played in what was happening around her. His clothes were impeccable, every movement refined and elegant, as if he moved with a special grace, perfectly suited to his status. The longer Christina looked at him, the more ordinary he seemed. But suddenly someone else made a sound, causing her to be distracted. She turned and heard her name called. At first, he expected her to visit the perv's estate, but this did not happen, and this surprised him a little. He was a little disappointed that Christina did not follow the expected route, as it broke the usual order of things and his expectations. It was Rodrigo Perves, the second son of the dukedom, with whom Christina spent much time during her childhood, following him everywhere. Now she remembered who it was, and she immediately realized that their meetings would once again bring back old memories, as if the past had come alive for a moment before her. Christina apologized and explained that her eyes were just beginning to adjust to the mediocrity of those around her, like the process of dark adaptation after bright light. He immediately understood her meaning, and she explained that her reaction to him was delayed because his appearance seemed unremarkable. She wanted to say that Rodrigo's appearance was so ordinary that her assessment only occurred after a moment of observation. All around them, people's gazes fell upon them, their attention focused on them, as the presence of the Duke's son always attracted interest. But most tried not to look directly, realizing that it was better not to get involved with him, because his status and origin made him unattainable. He noted that it seemed that Christina was very offended by him, and this was immediately reflected in her behavior and attention to him. The reason was the marriage negotiations with Melissa. She didn't even greet him properly, which didn't go unnoticed. He remembered how she had once followed him around, showing interest in him, only to suddenly go to the academy and catch his attention. Because of this, he impulsively agreed to negotiate marriage with Melissa, but did so insincerely, believing that Christina was acting on a whim to arouse his interest. He suggested that they be considered even, since they had both been throwing tantrums at each other, and this might put an end to the long-standing disputes and grievances between them. Christina asked him again what he meant when he spoke about past accounts and calculations, trying to understand the meaning of his words. She asked if he knew how to calculate performance functions in general, implying that it required certain knowledge and experience. He asked what that meant, and she noted with a grin that he couldn't even understand that, confirming the weakness of his skills. His abilities were too weak to count with her. Perhaps he abandoned mathematics after the problems with the torn calendar. They continued arguing, and Christina finally said that if he wanted a greeting, it would be better to do it right now, without delay. She asked how he was doing and reminded him that she thought he was already a great chef and expected him to improve. He asked her what she meant, and she reminded him that he had been interfering with her relationship with Melissa since childhood, creating obstacles and tension. When she said this, everything seemed to go silent, and those present simply choked from surprise and sudden tension. He didn't understand why Christina called him her chef, since there was no such closeness or professional connection between them. Eventually, they simply began to leave, gradually moving away from the scene of the conflict and leaving the situation unfinished. Christina noted that it was commendable that he tried to outdo his older brother by seeking to marry someone from the duchy, showing ambition. In such situations, it is necessary to choose only one person, without being distracted by different opportunities and relationships at the same time. For now, it's worth focusing on enhancing your own masculine charm to have a chance in such elections and to win attention. Melissa fled to a convent just before her engagement, choosing a path of service and spiritual life over her commitment to him. This meant that she chose to help the poor and do charity work rather than marry him for status or gain. He didn't even know how to react to this, being completely confused and afraid of Melissa's unexpected choice. The man then turned to the lady and expressed his regret, showing respect and realizing that the situation was unpleasant for all parties. But he asked that the private conversation be moved outside, as the current discussions were interfering with their business plans and organization. Christina apologized and said that everything seemed funny because those around her laughed, finding the situation funny and ridiculous at the same time. Then he grabbed her hand and said that they were leaving and she remained the same reckless girl she had been before, without changing her habits. She seems to have forgotten her place, having not encountered such people for a long time, and seems to think that she can leave him without consequences. Any attempts to resist were futile, because he was too persistent and stubborn to let her go easily. The reason why Christina pursued IVF was because of the mesmerizing red eyes that haunted her and lured her with their power. If she had married him, they would have had children with red eyes. And then Christina was obsessed with this unusual color and its meaning. Her hair could be dyed or she could wear a wig, but her red eyes remained an inviolable element of her passion and admiration. She admitted that this was the first man she had ever begged to marry, and 6 years ago, she would not have been able to control herself if he had smiled. Christina noted that, according to others, the first person she wanted to marry was Alex, which came as a surprise to everyone. In any case, judging by his behavior, he came running like a stray dog without an owner, showing strong affection and interest in her. He probably still finds her attractive, as she is a lady from the duchy, and despite her reputation, his feelings remain strong. After all, she is still kind, beautiful, and charming, attracting the attention and respect of others with her natural charisma and inner strength. Although she claims to be responsible for herself, he noted that she had no choice. The Duke's family would take the chance to settle her fate. Christina had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, not realizing the subtleties and hidden motives he was trying to convey with his words. She declared that she would be the beloved youngest princess, adored by her grandfather and overprotected by her brothers, the true authority figures in the family. He stated that the likelihood of this happening was extremely low, and even if it had happened, it wouldn't have made much of a difference. His reasoning seemed logical, and the situation could be viewed calmly, without undue anxiety. He was right. There was no point in wasting energy on an argument that would yield no results. All that was left was to let events take their course and not interfere unnecessarily. Suddenly, the only man in the room turned to him, remarking that the lady seemed to be telling the truth. His gaze was intent, as if he wanted to observe his interlocutor's every move. It was the handsome young man she'd recently seen. His appearance immediately caught her attention, and it was impossible not to notice his graceful posture and confident demeanor. They were slightly surprised to see him nearby. The presence of such a man was unexpected and slightly disconcerting, although none of them showed it openly. The man noticed that the Duke was barely able to find words. His behavior now seemed awkward, and this only reinforced the impression that the situation was spiraling out of control. He felt he needed to grab the Duke's hand to establish control and demonstrate his influence. He did so decisively, without hesitation. Grabbing his arm, he remarked that the Duke looked like a villain. The remark was made in such a way that genuine surprise and a hint of menace could be seen in the man's eyes. He looked at the Duke with a gaze that could frighten anyone. Even strong men felt the pressure of such a gaze, and the Duke sensed it immediately. Christina didn't understand who this man was or why he was reacting to the Duke like that. The situation remained mysterious and a little unsettling for her. She, too, was confused by what was happening. Everything seemed strange and unpredictable, and Christina tried to figure out what exactly was happening around her. The man addressed Christina, saying he'd been looking for her for a long time. His words were serious and insistent, leaving a sense of the gravity of what was happening. He asked for a little time. His eyes showed a desire for cooperation and hope for Christina's understanding. His expression evoked trust and a desire to help, but Christina understood that there was one thing she would never give up: her time. So she refused to give him a minute of her attention, staunchly protecting her personal space and not wanting to give in to pressure. He was stunned by her refusal. Even the experienced Marquis didn't know how to properly respond to such an unexpected and decisive reaction. When the Marquis left, the servant hurried to him, trying to find out what had happened and why he had left the room so suddenly, as if he had been rejected again. He was puzzled by why the man he had just offended had rejected him. For the Marquis, it was an unfamiliar and unpleasant experience, difficult to immediately understand. The maid advised him not to get upset and reminded him that their relationship should remain strictly businesslike, without emotional complications or misunderstandings. Perhaps Christina would change her mind later if he behaved professionally and with restraint. Right now, everything depended on his behavior and patience. At the Fraley estate, Christina walked alongside her maid, moving through the spacious corridors, pondering the events of the last few hours and trying to collect her thoughts. The maid noted that the mistress had not had a proper breakfast and had also skipped lunch, which could have affected her health and mood. It was important for Christina to eat something before further activities to restore her strength and stay in good shape for the upcoming events. Christina asked what they were talking about, as she had already eaten lunch earlier. Her recollection of her recent meal was accurate and beyond doubt. The maid was surprised. When had her mistress managed to eat? Christina explained that it had happened during her visit to Joshua, where she had been offered juice and light snacks. They treated her to juice, which, in Christina's opinion, was a complete meal replacement. It was enough for her to feel full. The maid was shocked, considering this insufficient to be considered a meal. To her, it looked like a light snack, not a proper meal. Christina insisted that this truly counted as a meal. She couldn't understand why the maid judged her actions and opinions so harshly. She grew tired of wandering the long corridors of the estate. The vast spaces oppressed her, and the walk became increasingly tedious and slow. Then Christina noticed that her maid was as strong and resilient as a spy. Despite the difficulties, she still maintained her resilience and attention to detail. The maid explained that she was bringing her own changes, but the lady's physical strength was still average. This indicated the need to approach any exertion with caution. Christina noted that the maid seemed strong and independent. Her straightforwardness and ability to speak her mind without regret inspired respect. They soon reached the greenhouse, and Christina finally took her place. The atmosphere here was calm, allowing her to focus on her work without rushing. The maid was stunned by what she saw, clearly not expecting such a turn of events. Her surprise was evident in every gesture and look. She said access to the interior of the orangery may require the Duke's permission, highlighting the strict rules and restrictions on visitors. Christina asked again, and the maid explained that this area was off-limits and they hadn't been allowed in there before. The rules were strictly enforced. Christina simply asked the maid to refrain from commenting, deciding to move on without being distracted by unnecessary remarks and warnings. She continued on her way and spotted a bird. The small creature immediately caught her attention and piqued her interest, even though it wasn't her summoned creature at all. It turned out to be her grandfather's summoned creature, not her own. Its appearance here was accidental, and Christina realized she had found herself in an unusual situation. The situation was such that Christina ended up there completely by accident, and this added an element of surprise and slight anxiety. How the bird told her to go away. The creature's voice or presence was insistent, as if it were trying to protect its territory. In his memories, Hu was a wondrous creature flying above the Duke's residence. It recalled childhood fantasies and the fascination with the magic of summoned creatures. Little Christina watched this with delight. She was about 6 years old, and she desperately wanted to see the magical creature with her own eyes. She dreamed of having a being like her grandfather's. Her desire to possess such magic was sincere and powerful. Christina was sure that her summoned creature would definitely be a bird, like her grandfather's. And this image was firmly entrenched in her thoughts. She simply watched what was happening, feeling a slight excitement and inner unease, as if what was happening could affect her personally. She couldn't even imagine what her grandfather was feeling, seeing all this. His feelings remained a mystery, but she felt him watching her closely. She reflected on Hao's rude ordering of her to leave, finding it unacceptable. Her thoughts were resolute, determined to rectify the situation. Hao didn't even know what to say to her words. The creature was a little confused and hadn't expected such force from the little lady. Christina decided that she would soon correct Hao's attitude and expected his cooperation, realizing that patience and consistency were needed. Hao noted that medicine had no effect on summoned beings, and Christina replied that no one had said she was a doctor. Her words were confident and unhesitating. After this, Christina turned to the maid and called her a spy, taking all the papers to control the situation and prevent unwanted interference. She said they needed to make sure no one entered for 2 hours. Everything had to remain under control, and safety was the top priority. The maid, who had attempted to cause harm, committed suicide during interrogation. Her brothers, the true authority figures in the family, monitored the situation and maintained order. Christina Fraley left the estate early in the morning, slipping quietly through the gates, leaving behind only the soft whisper of the morning wind and her grandfather's anxious thoughts. Grandfather Scary Fraley expected her to return to him immediately, imagining how her steps would sound familiar and confident in the corridors of the old estate. He wondered if the mission was so unpleasant for Christina that she was ready to put aside all the usual meetings and care, preferring solitude and reflection. The maid timidly apologized, explaining that Christina, Melissa, and Joshua were clearly eager to leave this place. Like birds reaching for the light from a cramped cage, all three seemed desperate to leave, each with their own inner reasons and hidden pain, giving up the familiar luxury and security of home. Even after Christina left for the academy 6 years ago, the estate remained filled with anxiety and bustle, never acquiring the calm atmosphere he desired. Joshua, remaining here, continued to be a source of endless worries, his unruly nature and insolence making each day more stressful and unpredictable for Grandpa. Grandfather thought that unless Joshua went completely crazy, he would never again cross the threshold of this stuffy and old house, maintaining the usual order for everyone. Joshua's words, spoken as he left without looking back, were vividly imprinted in Scari's memory, leaving a feeling that his grandson would long remain a reflection of his own rebellious nature. Only someone who has raised rebellious teenagers and experienced emotional outbursts alongside them can understand how difficult it is to cope with a free spirit like Joshua's. The maid remarked that she knew a little about this, since she herself had to cope with her own children at the stage of rebellion, which allowed her to look at her grandchildren's behavior with understanding. She was convinced that feelings are only conveyed when they are expressed sincerely and openly, and that silence cannot alleviate the inner experiences of either children or adults. Perhaps this is a good chance for Grandpa to show Christina how much he cares about her actions and her safety, even if she doesn't realize it. Scary wondered if he was really ready to open up and change in order to become closer to his grandchildren and understand them better than before, without the usual sternness and coldness. If you think about it, there was always an expectation that his grandchildren would change with time, that they would learn to manage their emotions and find their place in the world, rather than become a source of anxiety. However, my grandfather never thought that he himself might need to change and look at life through the eyes of youth, leaving old habits and fears behind. Yes, maybe he really should try to change a little, become more tolerant, more attentive to the feelings of his grandchildren, and show care without the previous severity. Although this is not easy. Suddenly, the butler burst in, announcing that Joshua had just arrived at the estate, his appearance suddenly disrupting the normal rhythm of life, causing everyone to exchange anxious glances. Grandfather stood up and took a deep breath, realizing that control over events had already slipped away, and another rebellious grandson was about to become a source of new worries and anxieties. It seemed that the second grandson had gone mad much earlier than Scary had expected, and now he was faced with the fact that his plans for a quiet life had been destroyed once again. After this, the grandfather immediately ran, realizing that he needed to immediately meet with Joshua in order to at least somehow try to understand the reasons for his daring actions. They immediately met in the hall, sat opposite each other, and silently watched each other for a while, as if trying to read thoughts and hidden emotions. The grandfather watched his grandson sternly, assessing his behavior and trying to understand how Joshua dared to cross the threshold of the estate again, causing a mixture of irritation and anxiety in him. Inwardly, he wondered how such an impudent grandson could end up here again, and tried to understand that his stubbornness and disobedience would never subside. Joshua, instead of leaving to study, returned, as if on the run from his usual life, attracting attention and causing shame with his daring confidence in front of the entire noble circle. He was always a difficult grandson, striving to get what his parents had deprived him of, without thinking about his grandfather's feelings and without taking into account his experiences and long-term care. Despite this, his grandfather always tried to treat him with patience and understanding, supporting him in difficult times, even if he himself suffered from Joshua's difficult character. He noticed that Joshua was not listening to him, ignoring his words and advice, and he did not understand why his grandson suddenly began to talk about himself so much, as if he was trying to prove something to the whole world. Grandfather didn't understand why Joshua suddenly started bragging and talking about things he hadn't done before, as if he wanted to draw attention to himself by any means necessary. In any case, Joshua returned because he noticed Christina's strange behavior, and this concern was one of the reasons for his sudden appearance at the estate. The butler was shocked to see Joshua, considering his behavior insane, and anxiously tried to figure out if he was okay and would not cause further trouble. Joshua said that his actions should not be taken into account and that he should continue to speak on the matter, focusing on the main goal and not on the butler's emotions. The butler reported that Christina had entered the greenhouse, and now that place had become the center of his concern, knowing how important it was to the family and their familiars. They realized this too late, and a lot of time had already passed since she entered the greenhouse, which added to the anxiety and forced them to speed up their actions. Grandfather was shocked to learn that Christina was in the greenhouse because there were many secrets and possible dangers waiting for her there that he did not want to face. He remembered How, the familiar who was in the greenhouse, and he understood that Christina's presence near him could be risky for both of them. Joshua tried to calm his grandfather, assuring him that it was too early to worry and that the situation was not as dangerous as it seemed at first glance. But Skari couldn't figure out how to remain calm when it came to the familiar he felt such deep affection and responsibility for. Joshua calmly explained that it was easy for him to keep his cool because it didn't directly concern him, and if he had been involved, he would have run to the greenhouse long ago. He was genuinely surprised that his grandfather was still looking at his face, showing patience and control despite all the emotional stress and anxiety. After this, Skari immediately rushed to the greenhouse, realizing that delay could cost him dearly, and that he must personally ensure the safety of Christina and the familiar. A maid stood in front of the greenhouse and greeted him with concern and a readiness to explain what had happened, as she was performing her duties as a security guard. She apologized, stating that Christina had ordered no one to enter the greenhouse for 2 hours, emphasizing the seriousness of her order and the independence of her actions. The Duke and Joshua were shocked by this news, believing that the maid had forgotten whose orders were truly to be followed and how important it was to uphold ancient traditions. The maid reiterated that Christina was aware that she was acting as a guard here, and that her orders were not subject to discussion, even in front of the Duke himself. Joshua was surprised that Christina did not punish the maid for her frankness, since she understood that he was at his post and still allowed the actions to continue. The maid noted that every word she spoke was perceived by Christina as a blow, demonstrating the strength of her authority and attention to detail, even in the smallest things. In fact, this sensation wasn't unpleasant at all. Rather, it brought refreshment, slightly surprising her, piqued her interest, and made her reflect on herself and her actions. The maid sensed a hint of praise in this mild reproach. She felt it wasn't a condemnation, but rather an incentive to evaluate herself, her strengths, and her capabilities more closely. Joshua found himself sharing this sentiment. He, too, sensed that behind such criticism lurked a hint of something good, something valuable, something that could be taken as a compliment. Even when he was pointed out for his wealth, he felt there was something positive in it. A small piece of goodness that could be cherished and used for self-development. The maid noted that, observing Christina, one can see that she rarely exaggerates. Everything she does is carefully thought out, without unnecessary emotion, with a clear purpose and a precise understanding of the situation. So now was the moment to trust her. She was making it clear she could handle this on her own and wouldn't do anything in vain. Judging by her actions, she knew what she was doing and was ready to fix it herself. Now that Christina had taken on the task, all that remained was to trust her genius. The master agreed with this decision, understanding that Christina's skill and experience deserved his complete trust. He noted that he had never trusted completely before. Joshua, however, realized that the situation was already such that it was too late to change anything, and all he could do was accept things as they were. Grandfather began to explain that the reason for their mistrust was that they had grown up difficult. He found it difficult to imagine completely relying on those who had faced difficulties and weaknesses from childhood. Joshua said that a lot could have changed by now. The family was no longer in a state of disarray, and even if there were problems, much could have been fixed. That's why an old and infirm person tries so hard to keep the family intact. He makes every effort to pass it on to his heirs in at least a relatively safe and stable state, Joshua noticed that his grandfather often bragged about things he'd never actually done. This was a characteristic of his character. Expressing his feelings sometimes took the form of praise or surprise. This is a way of showing one's emotions, which many call a special expression of feelings. Although in fact, this was the only way that grandfather shared his inner experiences. The maid had already arrived, but she was extremely tired. She literally collapsed to the floor, feeling her strength draining away, but she knew there was no time to waste. They were already there when they saw her. The atmosphere was tense, but it didn't stop them from observing what was happening, knowing that events were about to take a pivotal turn. Then they heard Christina's inner voice directing them to rid themselves of accumulated toxins. It wasn't just words, but a guiding message to maintain their strength. It was the voice of Christina, as well as Hao, the summoned being. Their voices combined, creating the sensation of both mind and energy working simultaneously, focused on restoration. They heard Hu say it had been many years since his body had felt so fluid. It was a strength and a reminder of the vital energy that was gradually returning. Everyone simply couldn't believe what was happening. It seemed impossible that such changes could have been achieved in such a short time, and it was both surprising and admiring. Grandpa nearly cried, feeling a wave of emotion. Seeing such changes unfold was so touching that it was almost impossible to hold back the tears. Hal flew out, expressing inspiration. He said he felt alive, that his energy had returned, and that he was now able to act again and help those he cared about. The doors opened, revealing Christina with her notes. Everything was neat and organized, giving the impression of a well-thought-out approach and complete focus on the task at hand. Hal looked truly refreshed. His movement, energy, and demeanor indicated that his recovery had been successful, and he was now ready for action again. Christina sat wearing glasses and taking notes. Her gaze was focused, every detail meticulously noted, reflecting her meticulous control over the process and her complete attention to what was happening. Grandpa and Joshua were in complete shock. They couldn't believe what was happening. It all seemed so unexpected and impressive, as if Christina's strength and care had performed a miracle. They turned to Christina and believed that all this was possible thanks to the awakening agent. It seemed to be the source of energy that gave Hao new life and the ability to act. But Christina asked for a moment. She was focused, and her request implied that intrusion was undesirable now. Everything had to go according to her plan for the outcome to be as effective as possible. She reiterated that her energy was draining, so it couldn't be disturbed. Any distraction could lead to a loss of concentration, which could mean a loss of work and results. A moment later, she finally sighed. This brief moment of release signaled that her efforts had ceased, and the results of her work and her directed action could now be observed. She ordered a spy to approach her. This was necessary for further coordination and verification of actions, ensuring the process continued without losses or delays, with maximum efficiency. The maid knew she could be fired if she continued at the same pace. She was worried she wasn't doing her job properly, even though she was making every effort to do the job as well as possible. The maid noted that she had done everything possible to delay them. She had held out as long as she could, understanding that every moment mattered to the overall task and outcome. Christina noted that 10 minutes was clearly not enough time to complete the task. She needed more time to complete the task. Even simply bringing coffee took longer than that. Hao turned to Christina with gratitude. He felt his situation had changed, that he could act again, and that Christina's efforts had restored his strength and confidence. He thought he'd have to remain weak and helpless. But now, thanks to Christina's intervention, the situation has changed, and he's once again able to help and act. He was delighted to be able to assist Duke Skari again. His recovery had given him strength, and he could now fulfill his duties, supporting his family and participating in important affairs. Christina told him not to try to look strong prematurely. Her instructions implied that his recovery was not yet complete, and he needed to proceed with caution, given his body's condition. He said everything would be fine in a few days. After all, the cleansing invocation was working, and the restoration of energy and strength would be complete, returning him to his previous state. Grandfather looked closely at Christina, as if trying to peer into the depths of her thoughts, and quietly asked what exactly she was holding in her hands. It was the first time she had seen her grandfather since leaving her home, and memories of her childhood came flooding back. When Christina was little, she always felt tiny next to his stern and imperious gaze, as if her entire existence was too insignificant for such a person. After that awkward incident with the reprimand because of Melissa, it became even more difficult to look him in the eyes, and every glance seemed to her like a test of strength of character and courage. So when she didn't receive any news at the academy, she simply reassured herself, thinking that this was the natural order of things and that she shouldn't expect any special attention. She didn't feel resentful. On the contrary, she thought it was wonderful that she wasn't related to him by blood. It freed her from unnecessary pressure and expectations. But now everything had changed, and the atmosphere between them had become different, as if the invisible line had disappeared, leaving room for respect and mutual recognition. Even if she was not his biological granddaughter, Christina now had every right to stand before him with her head held high, aware of her strength and accomplishments. Christina explained that it wasn't about medicine or scientific experiments, and certainly not about magic, but rather that she was using a special approach to solving the problem. She created a magical artifact that operates on the principle of directional osmosis, which uses concentration gradients to transfer substances between environments of different densities. However, her brother stopped her, gently reminding her that the details were not so important and they could do without in-depth explanations of all the technical nuances. People really rarely tolerate it when Christina starts talking about magical engineering, and it often leaves them more confused than understanding. She briefly explained that with the help of the artifact, it was possible to reduce the concentration of poisons in the body of one of the familiars, ensuring safety and restoration of vitality. Working with magical artifacts is usually difficult, and this one was no exception. It required constant manual intervention and complex calculations to function correctly. Changing her appearance was just one aspect of the job that Christina carefully worked on to create the desired effect without danger to herself or others. Summoning familiars became the next step in her magical practice, demonstrating that the artifact was capable of not only healing, but also summoning mystical entities. Suddenly, she heard her grandfather express genuine gratitude, showing that he appreciated her efforts and saw the results of her labors, although he did not immediately admit it. He said that he had done nothing for her personally, but it was thanks to her that Hao was saved, and this admission warmed her heart and gave her a feeling of importance. Christina responded that she had done much more than just save the familiar. Her actions had a wide-ranging effect and impacted many aspects of their lives. After all, every month her grandfather allocated her a certain budget, showing that he trusted her and supported her endeavors, regardless of formal connections. Thanks to her family name, she received funds simply for existing, and this feeling was pleasant and useful because it gave her freedom and confidence. Grandfather emphasized that he was careful to ensure that the distribution of funds was generous but fair, so that no one suffered from excessive or insufficient support. He also noted that he was glad of her return, although he was surprised why she decided to do it so suddenly, without much preparation or warning. Before Christina could answer, her grandfather said that it didn't matter. Home was always waiting for her, and she could return whenever she wanted. Christina recalled being scolded for waving a knife 6 years ago, but it hadn't led to her expulsion. It had been more of a lesson in discipline and caution. Besides, she was planning to become a professor at the academy, and the prospect seemed exciting to her, opening up new possibilities for the study of magic and science. But in reality, Christina understood that she did not want to be a professor, because in a rural academy, no one would appreciate her merits and achievements the way they would in a large city. Her grandfather thought that getting a doctorate for her own interest was already wonderful, but Christina said that she intended to give up graduate school and choose a different path. Grandfather Scari noted that this was a wise decision, since wasting energy on useless actions is a waste of time, and Christina always chose practical paths. What he called nonsense was exactly what Christina had been working on in her past life, putting in maximum effort and patience to achieve results. Joshua added that if someone had swallowed such a quantity of poison, it would have been impossible to feel normal, and the consequences for the body could have been catastrophic. She wondered how he was able to cope with such a strong toxin, flushing it out of his system and maintaining his strength at a high level, almost as if it were not dangerous. Hao informed his master that he had almost fully recovered. There was still some poison left in his body, but the healing process was progressing in such a way that his recovery was nearing completion. Grandfather again thanked Christina for her actions, noting that her action was not only brave, but also extremely valuable to everyone who cared about Hao. He couldn't understand how she had figured out how to save Hao, and how she had found out that he was right here, since such information was usually carefully hidden. Christina explained that the day before she was returning and passed by the garden, where she completely by chance bumped into Hao. which turned out to be a fateful meeting for both of them. In fact, she had no particular personal connection or friendship with Hao, and no usual closeness had ever developed between them, which made her action even more unexpected. But Hao was dear to her grandfather, so Christina decided to step in and help, driven by concern for Scary and a desire to protect what was important to him. Grandfather was shocked by Christina's behavior and her determination. He never expected such initiative and courage from a young girl, even despite her unusual abilities. Joshua noted that it was even more important to understand the significance of what was happening and the reason why there was so much coffee there, as it indirectly affected the energy and attention of everyone present. Christina explained that she drinks coffee while working to maintain concentration and energy, as long hours of research and laboratory experiments required her full dedication. Grandfather looked at Joshua with irritation, clearly not pleased with the intervention and reasoning, but then returned his attention to Christina, realizing that her words made sense. After this, he turned to Christina, hinting that they needed to discuss important things that concerned her responsibilities, her working methods, and how she used her time. The maid brought a report, carefully revealing details and events that had occurred recently, and the information turned out to be important for understanding the current situation. Christina realized that the maid was openly demonstrating that she was a spy, without trying to hide her actions, which caused the girl a mixture of surprise and alarm. Grandfather said that Christina seemed to have gone crazy because what she was doing was out of the ordinary. He also mentioned that people hadn't eaten properly today, which was also important. Joshua reminded us that it was impossible to hide how she lived at the academy, because Christina's experience and habits shaped her character and ability to cope with an incredible workload. Christina said that this was nonsense, because if she had really lived like that at the academy, the consequences could have been catastrophic, and discipline required a different approach. If she had lived the way she was supposed to, sleeping as much as she wanted and walking around without a care in the world, she would never have been able to write a dissertation and devote herself entirely to research. Time was too precious, and her schedule only allowed for the most essential tasks, so Christina skillfully organized her day and allocated resources for work. They decided to ask how she managed to juggle everything at the academy, since observations showed incredible abilities for concentration and attention to detail under heavy workloads. Christina noted that they had seen her quickly performing calculations next to Hao, and that she spent at least 16 hours a day in the lab, completely immersed in her research. Overeating affected her energy, so Christina kept her food intake to a minimum to stay active and focused during the most important moments of the experiments. They asked her again what she had just said, because the combination of work, limited food, and hours in the lab seemed almost impossible for the average person. Publishing her dissertation was incredibly challenging, and Christina couldn't afford to sleep like a normal person. Her days were dedicated to nonstop work in the lab. She constantly used stimulants, coffee, and medications to support her body in order to endure long hours of work without losing productivity, sometimes forgetting about her usual rest. A few moments later, Grandfather began to scream, amazed that Christina had lived like this for 6 years straight, which explained her frail physique and pale skin color. He was stunned that her constant dedication and hard work had left her so small, thin, and pale, despite her incredible mental and physical abilities. Christina noted that she had already explained the reasons for this lifestyle, emphasizing that it was a choice dictated by an interest in magical engineering and a desire for knowledge. She emphasized that she did this because she enjoyed magical engineering and research, and her passion for discovery drove her to devote herself entirely to her work. People at the academy admired her research every time she demonstrated the results of her experiments, and her efforts did not go unnoticed among her colleagues and scientists. Grandfather stated that this meant that he did not care about her personal needs because he only saw the results and achievements, and not the difficulties that Christina faced. Christina emphasized that she had no time to rest and had to regularly present her work results every 6 months, without even taking short breaks. Freelay's goals alone seemed nearly impossible. No one around her could match her persistence and determination, and her tenacity became her sole source of strength. The Academy's scholars, including the dean and professors, noticed her efforts and sought to keep Christina close, seeing her as an exceptional student whom they wanted to help and watch develop. To enter the Academy's elite, Christina had to prove she truly deserved it. She had no choice but to make every effort to prove her right to success. She had to quickly meet the publication quota required to become a professor. This was the only way to adapt to academic life and avoid being marginalized by the scientific world. Although Christina was not a particularly successful academic student, she still remained an outsider among her colleagues and students, feeling alienated and having to fight for her place in the academy. Grandfather Scary Freelay couldn't understand what he'd missed that had caused Christina to find herself in such a predicament. He was genuinely worried about his granddaughter and tried to find the cause of her suffering. He did not understand why fate had brought Christina to such hardships and unfair treatment, despite all her efforts in academic life. The old Duke was certain there must be something he'd overlooked. Perhaps this was why his granddaughter had endured such trials and been forced to face such injustice. No one at the estate would dare treat Christina the way they did at the academy. He couldn't understand how that couldn't protect her dignity. Joshua wondered why his granddaughter would sacrifice her family and her own safety for a position at the academy, seeing that such efforts only resulted in hardship and disappointment. After Christina left, she didn't return to the estate for 6 years. Her family didn't even attend her graduation ceremony, and she remained alone at all important events. She forbade her family from attending the academy to avoid humiliation and unwanted attention, realizing that the presence of relatives would not ease her situation, but would only create new difficulties. Joshua was furious, realizing his granddaughter was ignoring their letters. He knew they'd been sending 10 letters a month, only to receive vague replies 3 months later. The situation became so alarming that they contacted her professors to get news of Christina and to understand why she so rarely responded to the family's numerous letters. Christina explained that she responded to emails once every 3 months, but couldn't handle the dozens of emails she received each month. She tried to maintain contact, but the number of requests was too overwhelming. As for the graduation ceremony, her invitation and the first presentation of her dissertation were completely ignored, creating the impression that the family had deliberately distanced itself from her. Christina saw that all her attempts to establish contact with the academy and her family were ignored, which increased the feeling of loneliness and misunderstanding from her loved ones. They then began to suspect that someone might be intercepting their letters. This idea explained why Christina's important messages weren't reaching the family, creating the illusion that she was being ignored. This assumption was put forward by Howe, who observed the situation from the outside and tried to find a rational explanation for the strange lack of communication between Christina and her relatives. He noted that without the letters, they would have simply assumed their granddaughter was ignoring the family. Understanding that information could be lost somewhat eased their anxiety and frustration. Without even trying to clear up the misunderstandings, many in the family considered this to be a typical unfortunate situation and did not attach any importance to the internal difficulties of Christina and the academy. After this, the servant brought the master exactly what he asked for, showing that careful monitoring of letters could shed light on all misunderstandings and restore justice. He pointed out the number of these letters so that the Duke could be convinced that the correspondence was carried out regularly, and that many of them may not have reached their addressee due to external reasons. These were letters that Christina exchanged with the academy, each containing important information about her actions and decisions, influencing how her family perceived her. Christina looked closely at the letters and began to read them, delving into the details of each correspondence to understand how the situation had developed and why her family perceived it differently. She read that one letter recommended that the family not attend the graduation ceremony, believing it would be best for everyone and would avoid tension. The princess decided not to appear at the ceremony if the family gathered, believing that this way she could maintain her dignity and avoid unpleasant scenes that could overshadow the important event. She recalled that in the past she had said that it was better to continue research calmly, without unnecessary pressure, and that it was more important to focus on science rather than on external events. Freelay's birthday. She continued working on her research while observing the chaos, realizing that many around her were behaving like psychopaths. Joshua was completely confused. His emotions were overwhelmed, and he began to claim that Christina's family was completely destroyed, as if there was no hope left for recovery. The bird, who was watching what was happening, only asked that Christina say that she was okay and that she was in control of the situation, without revealing her true feelings. Christina, looking back on her entire family history, acknowledged that the family had indeed fallen apart, and that this was not just her feeling, but a bitter, genuine truth that she had to come to terms with. They didn't even try to notice what was happening, ignored obvious problems, and never tried to discuss them, as if turning a blind eye to the cracks that were gradually eating away at their relationship. Suddenly, Joshua turned to Grandpa Scarfrelai, explaining that he seemed genuinely prepared to leave the academy unchanged, without taking into account its importance and potential for development. However, Joshua clarified that he was actually just sending Alex there, and Christina didn't understand what to do next or how to properly react to such a decision, feeling confused. Christina felt very sorry for the academy because if Alex really went there, it could be the end of her, destroying all hopes that the place would develop and benefit students. Ultimately, she decided it was best to leave these thoughts and attempts at regret behind, trying not to dwell on what had happened and not to waste energy on pitying a situation that could not be changed. This behavior was unusual for her, because usually Christina was not able to simply let go of situations, but now she managed to pull herself together and refuse emotional overload. She left, firmly deciding that the academy was over and there was no point in returning to the past, because trying to change what had already happened was pointless and tiring. Still, there was relief that the mad dog was far away. Although part of her was still worried and concerned about the consequences of his actions, which could affect everyone. Christina asked why exactly, and Joshua explained that the reason was that Alex had threatened that if anyone crossed the threshold of the residence, he would cut off their hair, preventing them from getting closer. This threat sent a strong signal to everyone, demonstrating Alex's determination and his willingness to uphold order, which added tension and prevented Christina from relaxing or acting out of habit. Joshua advised Christina to wait calmly where she was, assuring her that the mad dog would take care of everything and that she could rest easy because the situation was under his control, despite the outward alarm. Christina wondered why Joshua took credit for things he hadn't actually done, creating an image of someone who could influence everything, even though it was just the impression of those around him. After this, Christina turned to her grandfather, expressing her desire for Alex to let the graduate students go, since they were only students, and asked him not to destroy the academy system, leaving space for work and development. She emphasized that there was still much to do at the academy, and asked her grandfather to talk to Alex to maintain order and allow everyone to continue their studies without unnecessary pressure. At this point, Pyagi returned and was clearly happy to see Christina, displaying the genuine joy and emotional attachment that always showed in his behavior when he was around her. Pyagi's sudden return, as she had expected him to stay away longer, and this brought a slight confusion into her thoughts, forcing her to reconsider her own expectations. Grandfathers Scar Fraley and Joshua were also in shock, not expecting such a quick return, which made the moment even more tense and unpredictable for everyone involved. Christina noticed that Pyagi had spoken of a week's absence, but had returned earlier, and he himself did not understand why this had happened, creating a feeling of strange coincidence and inexplicable haste. When he was with Melissa, such a task would have definitely taken a week, so Christina's surprise was justified. Pyagi returned in just one day, breaking the usual routine. Christina reported that Melissa had declared a break in her relationship with Fraley and sent Pyagi to her, which changed the entire dynamic of the relationship and introduced new emotional complications into the proceedings. This time, Melissa did not threaten or disturb Pyagi, showing a complete reluctance to interfere, which was unusual, and Christina understood that the situation was now completely controlled by other motives. The bird was angry at being ignored and reminded him of the past, when Christina would create problems to get his attention. Now that he was around, interest in those games had waned. He began to express hostility, demonstrating that he simply hated her, after which he flew away, leaving Christina alone, forcing her to realize the consequences of her actions and leave the situation without intervention. Christina was left alone and simply looked at the sky, thinking about what had happened, trying to find inner balance and understand how to cope with her emotions after Pyagi's departure. The girl received instructions that she should go after the bird and try to console him, realizing that her words could have hurt the chick and that it was now important to correct the consequences of her thoughtless actions. She realized that she could have hurt Birdie with her thoughtless words, and now the responsibility for restoring trust lay entirely on her, requiring attention and patience. Christina understood that summoned creatures were highly emotionally dependent on their masters, and their behavior directly reflected the owner's attitude, which made her actions especially important. Summoned creatures only follow the orders of their master, so Christina knew that she shouldn't rely on others and needed to act on her own, maintaining balance and control over the situation. Therefore, she cannot dwell on the past. Despite everything, she remained her grandfather's granddaughter, and this connection gave her the strength and right to correct the situation without losing confidence in herself and her actions. He wondered why she was so concerned about the opinion of her summoned being, reminding her that the residence was not an academy, and that the rules and approaches to life here were completely different, requiring understanding. He could no longer skip meals and rely solely on potions for studying, as he had before. His health now required attention, otherwise his strength would quickly fade. Studying with potions and constant stress were a thing of the past. She had to accept that her old methods would no longer help her achieve success and support herself. Christina first decided to go to her summoned being, as it needed comfort. It seemed that was the most pressing matter at the moment. After receiving advice from her grandfather, she realized that it was worth showing at least a little respect and attention to him, demonstrating that she valued his experience and wisdom. Christina decided to go to the chick, promising to rid it of its whining habit forever. Thanks to her grandfather's advice, she felt reborn, a true mistress of the pie. She became curious whether the little bird had actually delivered the letter. This fact could change a lot, and she wanted to see for herself. Joshua approached his grandfather and asked if it was really possible to let Christina go so easily, as if there was nothing that connected her to the safety of the palace. The Duke suddenly appeared in Prince Heaton's study at the Imperial Palace. His arrival was unexpected and caused a certain tension among those present. The prince sighed heavily, realizing he would have to deal with Rodrigo again. He couldn't predict the consequences of this visit. The Duke probably had no idea that due to the Emperor's illness, the palace was practically devoid of guests, and his appearance was extremely inappropriate. If Rodrigo continued to show up unannounced, even the prince would begin to feel the sidelong glances of the palace officials who were keeping order. The Duke asked to be heard and helped only once. He had a specific request, which he considered essential to the realization of his plans and ambitions. He recalled the last time his brother returned with a great achievement and emphasized that all the efforts he had put in had been in vain. He then mentioned Christina, noting that she had changed since she had followed him, and now his carefully laid plan was in jeopardy. The Duke sought to pressure the prince into marrying the princess. The Frele family was now the best choice for strengthening his position. If this marriage takes place, he will be able to become the heir, ahead of his own brother, and secure for himself the high status in the empire that he has long dreamed of. For him, all his previous services to the prince seemed trivial, because by influencing the marriage decision, he gained real power in the imperial palace. The Duke believed that in the future he would become the next emperor, and that marriage to Christina would only accelerate his rise to the throne. The prince noted that the Duke was not yet the crown prince, as his status depended directly on the presence of a living younger brother who could change the line of succession. The Duke objected, claiming that his younger brother was no longer alive because he had personally taken his life by pushing him from a height with his own hands and leaving him without a chance of salvation. The emperor had been bedridden for 7 years due to illness, and no one expected his quick recovery, which created a power vacuum in the empire. The empress had been in seclusion since the disappearance of the crown prince, and her presence had no influence on the actual running of the country, leaving power in the hands of others. From then on, it was these figures who wielded real power, and the fifth empress's daughter had no way to influence decisions or the line of succession, being left without support. She had virtually no support and posed no threat to the line of succession. Most likely, the remaining prince would become the next emperor without any obstacles. However, the prince was troubled by the fact that the Duke was not the crown prince, and this left the possibility for unexpected complications in the political line of the empire. The Duke pointed out that if there were any young men in the empire of the same age with blue eyes as the crown prince, an investigation must be conducted to find out their true origins. Blue eyes were extremely rare and, as the Duke claimed, could not be changed, so this gave confidence that no substitution or danger to the plan would arise. He agreed to provide Princess Christina with the necessary assistance by writing her a letter that he could take with him to ensure proper communication and adherence to the plan. The Duke was grateful for the support, though he was irritated by the prince's constant return to old incidents. He knew he could have handled Rodrigo without outside help. Christina noted that the bird should tell the Duke about his irritation, since the little chick was the only witness to the emotions in her room. The Duke said that the poor little chick had nowhere to go, as his presence was important and ensured that he kept an eye on what was happening, protecting Christina's interests. If he had nothing in common with his family, then Christina would have suffered in silence. She went to the academy, leaving behind the familiar comfort of her home and the expectations of her loved ones. Christina approached him and nodded, confirming the truth of his words. Afterwards, they lay down together on the bed, feeling a strange calm in the silence that surrounded them. She thought that she would not go there, but a small bird reminded her of the need to take the step that she had long dreamed of, albeit with apprehension. Did that mean this was her place? She'd looked through all the old documents and papers, but not a single scene showed how her family had shaped her while she was away. Christina also noticed that he was only pretending to cry. The pillow remained dry, and his emotions seemed to him to be just a necessary mask for attention. He said it wasn't true, and it wasn't just her. Christina was rarely mentioned in this house, and communication between them remained rare and tense. From the very beginning, there was complete chaos here, in which it was difficult to discern order or meaning, and every day brought new minor conflicts and misunderstandings. She asked him if he missed Melissa, and he couldn't help but think of Christina, which made him think about how the past and present were connected. Christina wanted to understand if he resented Melissa, because it could explain many of his actions and emotions that seemed incomprehensible to her. She eventually abandoned the Duke's entire family to live on her own, while Christina struggled to maintain and protect her family ties and loved ones. Despite her apparent selfishness, Christina sought to help not only her family, but also those who were suffering, trying to change the lives of all the poor around her. The memories Christina received when returning to the past filled her heart with warmth and understanding, as if she had lived other people's lives, but felt them deeply. They were full of love and goodwill towards everyone except Christina. Her good looks were considered natural, which made her exceptional even among her close ones. She always approached people with a smile, so even family members who ignored each other couldn't help but greet her, noting her sincere attention. Christina thought about what awaited him in this life, realizing that he could face many trials and manipulations from Christina herself. The bird noted that she felt more energetic than before, and that it had now become easier to control the objects around her, as if the very force around her responded to her will. He noted that next time he would be able to reduce the time even further by improving his skills and increasing his efficiency, despite all the limitations and fatigue. Christina trusted him because he could pretend to be a little compassionate, and it worked. Sometimes even he forgot what was happening and did more than expected. If she can reduce the time, the first thing to decide is whether it is necessary to force him to work nonstop to achieve maximum efficiency in tasks. Sometimes I had to say things that I should never have said in front of the professor, as if the trust and naivety of the people around me created opportunities for cunning moves. Regardless, in the end, when Melissa ran away, Christina stayed, demonstrating resilience and a willingness to fight for her principles and loved ones, despite the difficulties. He wondered how Christina managed to stand so firmly on her feet, despite all the trials and external pressure that could break anyone. Christina believed that her strength was the result of simple habits and discipline that helped her maintain resilience and the ability to move forward without losing herself. This power allowed her to support objects against gravity and resist external circumstances that would normally weaken others around her. She began to explain her principles again, but he was barely listening anymore, thinking about his own affairs, leaving her words as a quiet background for his own thoughts. The next morning, the maid burst into Christina's room, rushing to tell her important news that could affect her immediate future and future decisions. She reported that the Duke had sent an important proposal, the content of which could change many things in the lives of Christina and her loved ones, leaving her with a choice. Christina assumed that this was Prince Heaton's opinion, since only his views and influence could play a key role in how events unfolded around her. The maid was shocked and completely did not understand how Christina found out about something that was supposed to remain a secret, which emphasized her ingenuity. The only family above the Freelay was the Imperial, whose influence and power could decide the fate of people, leaving little room for independent decisions. Rodrigo acted faster than Christina expected, anticipating her moves and showing that his methods and plans could make unexpected changes to the situation. In the original story, Rodrigo also used similar methods to win Melissa, demonstrating his strategic thinking and ability to achieve his goals. In the original, the prince's feelings for Melissa would later change his words and actions, showing that emotions could be intertwined with politics and influence on loved ones. But now the prince probably doesn't even know Christina's face. He most likely gave the order without thinking, trusting the instructions rather than considering the consequences for her. There was only one reason to refuse an order that could have changed the situation, but to do so, one had to be resourceful and use available pretexts. You could say she has a significant other and use that as an excuse to refuse, creating a situation where refusal would be perceived as natural. This can easily be interpreted as an attempt by the imperial family to separate them, showing how political and family intrigues intertwine with personal life. But there was a problem. Such a man did not exist. And if her grandfather did not approve of the plan, all attempts would be in vain and would not bring the expected result. However, she could not marry Rodrigo, so Christina decided to act quickly, realizing that delay could deprive her of her only chance of success. She went straight to her grandfather to discuss everything in person and convince him of the need for support, because without his approval, any action was doomed to failure. Joshua slammed his fist on the table. Christina had no idea what this madman was doing, but a sense of determination and strength emanated from him, spurring her on. The second prince of the Rodrigo family sent the Duke a letter demanding the marriage. His message was insistent and clearly demonstrated the prince's determination, causing tension in the palace. This was immediately reported to Joshua, who found himself drawn into the situation, realizing that the prince's decision could affect the reputation of the entire Frelly family. Joshua was filled with rage and did not hide his irritation, his emotions literally boiling when he realized that the marriage could be forced against the wishes of the family. He began to get ready very quickly, realizing that delay was unacceptable and that every moment of delay only increased the threat of an unwanted union. Joshua chose the most extravagant outfit, adorned with a large logo to emphasize his status and leave no doubt about his determination to protect his family. Despite his attire and confidence, he understood that he could not welcome the prince's claims without internal resistance, because it was extremely unpleasant morally. He could not refuse the reception, since the prince was acting as a potential son-in-law, and the palace etiquette rule required showing respect to the guest. Joshua only asked where Rodrigo's second son was going, and received the answer that the prince was moving to the duke's residence, intending to discuss the marriage agreement. Frankly, the alliance between the Freley Duchy and the Pervez family seemed dubious. Neither side was a perfect match in terms of status or reputation. Alex had such a crazy nature that anyone who relied only on his appearance quickly faced disappointment and could not stand the test. Even a day or two of living with him might prove too much for most before they succumbed to the pressure of his character. Joshua was a confirmed bachelor and categorically did not plan any marriage, which only exacerbated the tension in the plans of his second son, Rodrigo. Melissa had entered a convent, which automatically made her marriage impossible, which excluded her as a potential candidate for marriage to the prince. Only Christina remained, whose reputation was far from impeccable, which made the prince's proposal even more problematic and risky for the family. Objectively speaking, Rodrigo's second son should have been grateful that the family was at least considering the possibility of a union, even if its opinion remained dubious. Under the pressure of circumstances, there was no compelling reason to refuse, but the prince's behavior and his claims really infuriated Joshua, irritating him to the limit. The mother sincerely loved all members of the family, striving for harmony and happiness for everyone, even if external circumstances threatened to upset this balance. She constantly talked about the importance of family and wanted all relatives to remain happy, supporting each other despite difficulties. If a family could be destroyed by the whim of one person abandoning everyone, then the value of these relationships became extremely fragile and questionable. In any case, Christina understood that she shouldn't lose her mind over empty threats, and that she needed to act decisively to protect herself and her family. First of all, she decided to prevent this unwanted marriage and turned to her grandfather, reminding him how she helped him heal the summoned creature Ho. So Christina asked him for a favor, explaining that she had a compelling reason for not marrying Rodrigo that could not be ignored. The reason was so serious that even the prince himself could not refute it or ignore it, making Christina's request completely logical. Grandfather insisted that Christina listen to him first, allowing her to present her arguments and explain her reasons before making a final decision. She didn't have to earn his favor or heal him again to make her request. It was enough to simply say what she wanted. Christina could openly declare that she did not want to marry the prince, and this statement already had force, since it expressed her will and position. She had to remember that she could speak directly about her desires and not hide her true intentions, so that no one could force her to go against themselves. The truth was that Rodrigo had even been previously considered as a potential suitor for Melissa, which added context and significance to the situation. Christina admitted that if this had concerned Melissa, she would have created endless scandals, defending her interests and rights to independent choice. In any case, Christina could have ignored the letter if she considered his claims unworthy of attention, preserving her own opinion and freedom of action. Even if the marriage agreement might please the prince, it did not ensure the preservation of friendly relations, which could be damaged by pressure and intrigue. Grandfather also asked how long Joshua had been in his office, surprised by his sudden appearance at a time of important events. Joshua explained that he had come on business, and although the original reason for his visit had been clear, it had now disappeared. leaving only the need to adjust his actions. After that, he stepped aside, realizing that his presence was no longer critical and he could give way to the elder. Joshua then went out into the hallway to give others time to act and not to create obstacles for Grandpa to communicate with Christina. He was surprised that no one was going to see him out, and he realized that palace duties sometimes required paying attention to guests. However, he still retained his noble dignity, and Joshua shouted that Grandfather was busy and his legs still hurt, explaining the delay and the need to be patient. He thought that someone younger should show respect to an older person, especially when the older person is limited in abilities and needs support. After this, Christina appeared, who, as expected, could not allow her grandfather to go alone, so she herself went out to see him off with due attention and care. Christina tried to understand the essence of his words and actions, analyzing what was happening in order to act in the interests of the family and prevent possible undesirable consequences. Christina Freeli headed to practice, confident in her movements and her mood. Joshua walked alongside her, watching her, trying to guess her plans and mood. She was determined to perfect her steady movement, controlling every step and breath. Everything around her seemed motionless except for her. Focused and attentive, this type of movement required maintaining constant speed, evenness, and concentration, as if the body became an instrument and the mind the conductor, connecting everything into harmony. Joshua watched her in silence, unsure of what to say. His thoughts were tangled between admiration and anxiety, and the words stubbornly refused to reach his lips. Christina performed the exercises with equal concentration and calm, her face remaining impassive, reflecting determination and inner discipline, almost like stone. Joshua felt uneasy with the servants watching him closely. This pressure made him want to leave quickly, to escape their seemingly judgmental gazes. Christina reminded him that she had asked him not to say such words when leaving the house. Her tone was gentle but firm, reflecting her concern and desire to maintain order in the house. She thought about her brother Alex, realizing that their relationship often resembled that of strangers. A sense of alienation sometimes crept in even in familiar situations. Before her lay unread letters she hadn't even suspected existed. Their number was both astonishing and terrifying, creating a sense of missed opportunities and secrets. At that moment, Christina felt a loneliness as acute as at the graduation ceremony, when she was deprived of the support of her loved ones and was forced to cope on her own. If the family had stuck together and prepared for her past life, events might have turned out differently. Everything seemed a web of coincidences and omissions, but Christina decided it was worth trying to collaborate with them, even if only briefly. Small steps seemed important to establish at least some connection and understanding. She turned to her brother, reminding him that he was going to find out information about the crown prince for her, hoping that this would help her in her current plans and concerns. He promised to handle the task, and his answer sounded different than yesterday. His words conveyed confidence and a willingness to act, which calmed Christina slightly. Joshua also claimed they knew everything. He couldn't even understand how Hao had been so wounded and poisoned. Events had happened too quickly and mysteriously. Christina asked to find out when Hao first began to feel weak. It was important for her to understand the chronology of events in order to plan further actions and security measures. She wanted her brother to help her find someone for her, most likely in the capital. It was important that the person be reliable and able to provide the necessary information. Alex noted that finding people was his specialty and asked who exactly they needed. He knew it couldn't be a friend, since Christina had practically none. Christina named Marquis Levin, but her brother couldn't understand why they were looking for this unfortunate youth. His bewilderment reflected his incomprehension of his sister's motivations. Christina also couldn't understand why her brother called him unhappy. Levin was important to her and worthy of attention, and the epithet seemed unnecessary and unfair. The Marquis Levin's estate was imposing. The architecture, details, and atmosphere conveyed the owner's importance and status, creating an impression of wealth and status. The Marquis noted that today would likely be his first stroll through the capital. This event promised to be important and interesting, arousing the curiosity of everyone around him. The servant was shocked that it would all happen today, but the Marquis confirmed it. The urgency and necessity of action were evident in his every word, lending significance to the moment. The situation required a quick solution, and the Marquis stated that everything was simple, an ordinary relationship, but the seriousness and weight of each step was felt. You can't go far with the princess, he thought. The distance between them remained considerable, and even important actions required caution and precision in planning. Nevertheless, he was determined to carry out his plan. His determination was clear, regardless of the circumstances and obstacles that might arise along the way. It all came down to timing. Everything else seemed secondary, as only the sequence of actions and their predictable and inevitable outcome mattered. Caesar Levin, Marquis of Levin, continued to observe events, ready to intervene if necessary, and direct the development of events in the right direction, relying on his experience and influence. Marquis Caesar Levin recently made a generous donation to research, transferring a huge amount of funds, which attracted the attention of many scholars and observers of the Tylus Empire. Even though he remains an unmarried man, his sudden decision to invest such a large sum of money in a small academy seemed strange, almost unbelievable. The most important thing was that the Marquis understood perfectly well what he wanted from Christina, which gave her every right to offer him a deal with a fictitious relationship without any doubts. In the original story, he had no connection whatsoever with Melissa, and Christina had no idea what he looked like. But their business partnership made him the perfect fit. Come to think of it, she remembered that the previous Marquis had died at 16, leaving behind an inheritance, and a distant relative had been appointed his successor to preserve the family line. But that wasn't the point. 3 years ago, the Western Territory was faced with a barbarian invasion, which caused a real commotion and almost destroyed order in these lands. Suddenly, a young man appeared who turned the tide of the battle, saved the Marquis and destroyed the enemies, and turned the survivors into the Marquis's subjects, thereby earning his trust. Then the childless Marquis adopted a young man of humble origin, making him his successor, so that he would continue the work and maintain order in his domains. So who was this ordinary man capable of spending money like this? He was, in essence, a reincarnated billionaire with extraordinary management skills. He managed the territory skillfully before moving to the capital about a year ago, and his business decisions and strategy earned him respect and cautious attention. No one really knew why he moved to the city. He remained withdrawn and uncommunicative, which made his image even more mysterious to those around him. He didn't have any close connections, so Christina wondered how Joshua knew he was obnoxious and how he could judge his character without knowing him personally. Joshua explained that he was referring to his strange behavior, especially the fact that he did not wear clothes from famous designers, which was precisely what irritated observers and made him unusual. Thus, Joshua hinted that despite his oddities, the Marquis remained attractive and handsome, which could play into Christina's hands in the negotiations. And if he looked strange, it would only emphasize his attractiveness and make his appearance and demeanor even more memorable. Christina's brother asked why she wanted to meet such a person, trying to understand her motivation and how safe it would be for her. Christina should have calmly reassured her brother not to worry about family matters and emphasized that this was her personal matter and did not concern his life. After this, the brother left, leaving Christina alone with her thoughts and plans, and the atmosphere in the house again returned to its usual peace and quiet. Christina did not understand why the maid forbade her from drinking coffee and other stimulants, forced her to eat strictly healthy food with 3 essential nutrients, limiting her freedom. The maid explained that this was an order from the Duke, who carefully monitors the health and routine of his charges, including Christina's granddaughter, and makes no exceptions. Christina wondered who decided what was considered a safe dose, since her doses seemed pathetic, making almost no difference, and she didn't see much point in it. The maid added that this was the order of the Duke's physician, who had accompanied him since childhood and knew all the necessary measures to maintain the health of his charges. And she confirmed that this doctor really does follow all the appointments, adjusting the diet and routine in the interests of Christina and other family members. He's been doing this for quite some time now, so it might be worth finding a way to get him on your side given the situation so you can influence future recommendations. In addition, the maid reported that Christina had received a letter from Joshua, who had already found the Marquis and was ready to discuss further actions regarding their business cooperation. The Marquis was now in the clubhouse, a legal place for meetings and negotiations, and the maid, along with Christina, carefully read the letter, assessing the situation and possible risks. If the matter was not urgent, Christina could postpone the meeting to a more convenient time, trying to avoid questionable places and ensuring her safety and comfort. The clubhouse in the original story was the place where Christina would eventually have to deal with the situation, and now it was becoming important to her plans again. So Christina began preparing a response letter, thinking through the words and strategy to ensure the meeting was as effective and safe as possible for all participants. Christina Frele decided that they should go about their business with the film, moving towards their goal with caution and attention to every detail of what was happening around them. She also intended to send the letter she had just written, carefully weaving her words and making sure that its content would be clear and would have the desired effect on the addressee. Today, Christina planned to shut down an illegal gambling den, determined to carry out this risky undertaking, carefully considering every step. The Marquis sat in the clubhouse, immersed in his own thoughts, with a servant standing next to him, closely watching all his master's movements and ready to carry out any order. The servant decided to ask whether the Marquis was really going to undertake what he had planned today, observing his reaction and trying to assess the seriousness of his intentions. The Marquis confirmed his plans, leaving no doubt that he was ready to act today, remaining calm and confident in his decisions. He looked closely at the man sitting opposite him, trying to read in his face the thoughts and intentions that might be hidden behind the outward composure. The man turned out to be Orca, a former imperial receptor whose experience and past made him a particularly significant and respected figure in this circle. He retired 5 years ago, having once been a fencing instructor, and his reputation was maintained by his skill and the strict discipline he maintained. This man was on the very same trip when the Crown Prince disappeared. Despite the fact that his pension fund was small, he was bankrupt and visited a gambling den daily. It seemed that someone had once given him a huge sum of money, which allowed him to maintain his usual way of life, despite financial difficulties and frequent defeats. Suddenly, Orca looked up and noticed a pink-haired girl who entered the hall, immediately attracting attention with her bright appearance and confident gait. Alongside her was her maid, who carefully monitored every detail of her outfit and was ready to support her mistress in all her actions, remaining unnoticed by others. Christina's outfit seemed bold and unusual, attracting the attention of those present. The Marquis noted that his relationship with the girl remained simple and direct, without unnecessary formality. The Marquis was surprised when he saw her, not expecting Christina to appear here, and at the same time he appreciated her determination and the confidence with which she acted in the new environment. The servant asked the Marquis what game Lady Christina was fond of, trying to understand the strategy and level of risk she was willing to take in this gambling activity. She was playing blackjack, a gambling game where players draw cards, aiming to get a total point as close to 21 as possible, assessing their chances of winning. The player's main goal was to get closer to the number 21, carefully calculating every move and thinking through every bet so as not to lose too many chips. Then the Marquis and the servant noticed how many chips Christina was taking, surprised by her courage and confidence, because the size of the bets spoke of the seriousness of the girl's intentions in the game. She split the chips between the two pots, demonstrating an unusual strategy that immediately caught the attention of everyone watching her in the room. Everyone was amazed by what was happening as they watched Christina's performance. Her confidence and determination caused genuine surprise, making everyone else hold their breath. Even the participants of other games began to turn around, watching her actions, realizing that she was attracting everyone's attention and setting an unusual pace for what was happening. The maid was shocked by what her mistress was doing, not expecting that Christina would take such a risk and be able to act so boldly and decisively in this exciting battle. The chick, pretending to be a doll, remained silent, trying not to attract attention and not to interfere, so as not to disrupt the subtle dynamics of what was happening at the gaming table. The servant asked Lady Christina if she knew her cards, trying to understand whether she realized how fortunate or risky the current situation in the game was. The Marquis noted that she did not know the exact combinations. However, her strategy and decisions reflected the confidence and courage inherent only to experienced players. And although it wasn't the final round yet, Christina bet a large amount, demonstrating determination and a willingness to take risks without checking her cards beforehand, which surprised everyone. And then everyone was shocked when they saw that she had 20 points. The combination turned out to be almost perfect, forcing those present to reconsider their expectations of the game. Christina smiled as she watched the others' reactions. Her calm and confidence made the moment especially tense, adding drama to the proceedings at the table. Everyone tried to understand whether this was possible, how such an absurd situation could arise in reality, baffling the mind and making one doubt the usual logic of what was happening. After this, Christina said that she was deviating and ordered the spy to collect all the chips that they had taken, demonstrating control of the situation and the clarity of her actions. But suddenly the man intervened, demanding that she stop. He suspected that the girl might be using dishonest methods, which added to the tension and mistrust of her actions. It seemed strange that an unknown girl, previously unfamiliar with this place, would suddenly win so many chips, raising questions about her experience and skill in the game. Christina tried to understand what the man was saying, remaining calm and confident without losing control of the situation and her table manners. She barely heard the loser's voice over the clink of chips, concentrating on her actions and not allowing the noise to distract her from calculating her next steps. The man asked if she knew who he used to be, trying to determine if Christina was aware of the authority or influence she was dealing with at that moment. Christina noted that he was wearing a mask and that she didn't know him. Her observation skills allowed her to remain safe without revealing any unnecessary information about herself or her intentions. After this, the man grabbed her hand, declaring that what was happening was unthinkable, trying to emphasize the suddenness and unpredictability of her actions in the context of the game. Seriously, her wrist felt like it was covered in honey, slippery and soft. Everything was going according to plan, and Christina continued to figure out how to manage the noise and attention of those around her. The atmosphere grew tense, creating the necessary conditions for the appearance of the one Christina was waiting for, and setting the stage for the subsequent development of events in the hall. Suddenly, the man stood up, grabbed the hands of the person who was holding Christina, and emphasized that violence was not welcome here, seeking to restore order and control. He claimed to be the owner of the establishment, demonstrating authority and power that allowed him to control the situation and intervene in what was happening. The owner's presence heightened the tension, forcing all participants to be aware that their actions were being observed and could have consequences, requiring caution and calculation. Christina noted that if a problem arises, it's logical for the clubhouse staff to examine it from all angles, trying to figure out how to deal with it and who is to blame. The owner appeared only in moments of serious problems, when the usual measures and employees could not cope on their own, and his intervention became necessary to control the situation. He was the man who earned the most in the clubhouse, and his influence extended to all decisions concerning both business and the protection of the interests of the club members. The owner also noted that apparently the young lady acted without any tricks or gimmicks. Her actions were straightforward, and this surprised the experienced employees, accustomed to intrigue. He added that Christina was apparently a newbie, and that it was possible that she was just a little lucky, and that her success could not be entirely attributed to experience or skill. But this did not diminish their interest. The owner acknowledged that the clubhouse had lost significant funds due to her actions, but they were nevertheless willing to accept this with gratitude, understanding that the newcomer had not intentionally caused harm. Christina thought she had just used her brain a little, using her knowledge and intuition, and she did not expect at all that her small step would cause such a storm of events around her. But suddenly the chick became angry, his behavior became aggressive, and he unexpectedly rushed straight at the owner's face, demonstrating that he was not only loyal, but also unpredictable. The owner immediately removed his mask, and it became clear that the hidden threat was much closer than it seemed, and now no one could predict what would happen next to the chick and those present. Christina realized that all these luxury items scattered over the body made her think that it was Joshua, her brother. So familiar did he look and carefully imitate his image. He seemed to be deliberately creating the impression that he was her brother, and he almost succeeded, because the details of his appearance and his manner of behavior were so similar that Christina almost believed him. What was even worse was that he wore a wig that completely imitated his brother's image, and so Christina did not hesitate and ordered his immediate capture, realizing that he was a dangerous criminal. She was sure that the wanted criminal was in front of them, and this was confirmed by his behavior and attempts to deceive those around him, which made him truly dangerous. He was caught very quickly, and Christina immediately ordered his arrest, realizing that any delay could have serious consequences for everyone present. He was an extremely dangerous criminal, and to keep everyone safe, he had to be carefully restrained and isolated, eliminating any possibility of escape or further machinations. Everyone present was shocked to learn that the owner was not Joshua at all, and this news dramatically changed the perception of the situation, forcing everyone to reconsider their actions. There were many rumors that the owner of the clubhouse was her brother, but now it became clear that these were just rumors, and the real owner was a completely different person who hid his face and intentions. In fact, the owner was a particularly dangerous criminal, supported by the prince, and his true goals were carefully hidden, and the intervention seemed accidental only at first glance. Instead of going to jail, he pretended to be Joshua and ran the club without friends to expose his identity, carefully concealing his criminal connections and goals. He chose Joshua as a source of wealth and cover for his operations, knowing that no one outside could verify or refute the rumors he himself was spreading. He could not even imagine that later all this would turn against him, and that carefully planned machinations and false identities would one day lead to his exposure. In the original situation, he closed the club and disappeared at the most opportune moment. But Christina was able to expose him before the club closed completely, outsmarting the criminal. Ultimately, this was a problem that had to be addressed sooner or later, and Christina took responsibility by dealing with the situation at the very moment it was needed. The enemy was ready to escape at any moment, and his cunning actions required the utmost caution to not give him the slightest chance to escape justice. He had already bribed high-ranking members of the Guard, and his plan was to create a big scene, forcing him to reveal himself, which could turn out to be disastrous for everyone involved. But gambling had never appealed to Christina, so she insisted that her spy exchange all the chips for cash while the club was still open to avoid unnecessary risks and troubles. The maid went to exchange chips, and at that moment, someone unexpectedly approached Christina, as if appearing out of nowhere, disrupting her usual rhythm of calmly observing what was happening around her. Christina turned her head and noticed a man with blue hair. Gratitude was evident in his gaze, as thanks to her actions, he had managed to identify and detain the enemy who posed a threat to their family. This man, Abian, was the second son in his family and at the same time the commander of the capital's 5th Guard, a disciplined man, accustomed to keeping the situation under control and acting quickly in critical moments. He came of a noble family, enjoying all the advantages and respect due to people of his origin, and his name inspired confidence both among the nobles and among the military. In addition, he received the letter that Christina had sent before she arrived here, and now it played a key role in how he planned to proceed in order to achieve his goal without unnecessary obstacles. In the letter, she informed him that if he now took a strategic position in the club, he would be able to catch the criminal, and this was only possible thanks to the precise information she had provided him with. Under normal circumstances, if the guards had been in cahoots, the takeover of the club would have been virtually impossible, and the entire enterprise would have turned into a futile, high-risk adventure for all involved. But Christina was confident that mentioning the criminal's name would attract his attention and awaken his determination to act, regardless of any difficulties and potential obstacles from those around him. As a result, the criminal himself, realizing that he was the center of attention in the capital, joined the Guard, vowing to catch himself, which created an unusual situation and gave him the opportunity to control the course of events. This man had achieved the position of captain by forgoing personal gain, including an advantageous marriage, simply to avoid corruption and maintain the integrity of his service, which made his actions especially significant. For a high-ranking nobleman, entering a city was always accompanied by events. Attention to his steps was enormous, and any action could become a reason for discussion among influential circles. All it took was dedicating one's life to pursuing the criminal, if he learned that Prince Heaton supported him, to create pressure and force him to act with the utmost determination and focus. If Prince Heaton interfered in the process, it could cause a scandal. So Abian knew he had to act independently and without outside help in order to maintain his reputation and control of the situation. Christina approached him and hinted that someone was clearly supporting the criminal and that he should be the one to solve this problem, without delaying or passing it on to others in order to avoid complications. Indeed, someone was directly and indirectly supporting the criminal, and it was Abian who had to deal with this himself, demonstrating leadership and resourcefulness in order to bring the matter to an end without outside interference. If the matter had been left to the guards or the imperial family, Prince Heaton might have intervened, which would have complicated the situation, so the decision required Abian's precision and independence. That is why Christina gave him all the necessary information so that he would understand that he needed to act decisively and without outside pressure, and he took her advice with complete seriousness. However, for now, he asked Christina to leave the area so as not to interfere with further operations and not to create unnecessary attention around the actions he planned to take in the near future. The place around seemed oppressive and unpleasant, as if it should have been closed long ago so that no one else would suffer here. In another life, this man would have met Melissa 6 months later, and as a captain of the guard, would have secretly fallen in love with her. But now their paths will not cross. Christina felt fine and wanted him to interrogate the criminal first before anything else happened in this tense place. She was waiting for the return of her maid, a spy who had gone to exchange money, carrying out an important assignment for Christina. Christina had won the money fairly, without any cheating, and so he thought it was only fair to get his share before the staff could pocket the winnings. He didn't understand how anyone could lead an honest life without cheating, and Christina explained that she didn't live, but used her mind and calculation. Although she was not skilled in playing other gambling games, she was confident in blackjack, relying on strategy and calculation. She began to tell him in detail how she had won, and the flow of her words was so unexpected that he was simply shocked. Such conversations took place in a confined space where the audience was unable to leave, being completely absorbed in what was happening. He admitted that mathematics was clearly not for him, realizing how skillful Christina was with numbers. Christina noticed from his look that he understood everything and continued talking about her winnings, emphasizing that everything was fair. She firmly stated that she had won legally and now wanted to get her money, not wanting to leave the situation unresolved. He said beginners often think they will get lucky, not realizing that success requires not only luck, but also calculation. Criminals prey on gullible people, and he explained how easy it is to lose money if you don't keep an eye on what's going on. She asked why he was looking at her like that, and he replied that he simply didn't know her very well, and the look was more of an assessment of the situation. As a child, he thought she was gloomy and withdrawn because there were a lot of rumors, but the reality turned out to be completely different. After this, Christina hinted that he should hurry to find out everything, but he continued to calmly discuss the details with her. The Freeley family's knights were on duty outside, and when the maid returned, Christina was going to call them for help and protection. He noted that the place was unsafe and was worried that something bad might happen to him if he stayed near her. Christina didn't understand why he didn't just go away and leave her alone, since the situation seemed quite simple to resolve. Soon another man approached them, reminding the captain that it was time to take care of his duties and affairs without wasting time. He addressed Christina with respect, acknowledging her status and position as if she were his lady at that moment. He offered to personally escort her to a safe place, demonstrating his concern and willingness to take responsibility. The knight was slightly surprised to notice the Marquis, because his appearance here was unexpected and attracted attention. It turned out to be an incredibly handsome man whom Christina had encountered by chance in a store, leaving a strong impression. This was the same Marquis whose reputation and charisma were immediately felt in his manner and appearance. He said that he knew the lady and was ready to accompany her, showing not only attention but also respect for her position. He asked them not to disturb him and asked Christina if this was true, being careful and tactful in his conversation. They might not have met yet, but his face seemed familiar, and Christina felt a desire to get to know him better. Now, perhaps he could ask the question later, as long as it wasn't about math, which gave her the opportunity to control the meeting. He would like to visit her at the residence, but Christina refused, explaining that she did not want to waste time on unnecessary meetings. He stated that he was obliged to express his gratitude properly, emphasizing his honor and manners before her. Christina reminded him that he would also have to pay, since blindly following orders almost led to a serious mistake. She clarified that she was ready to accept gratitude, and he should be ready to work as long as she needed his help. By the way, she was injured, and this attracted the attention of everyone present, adding tension to the situation. He noticed that she had a small bruise, trying to assess the extent of the damage and figure out how to help. Wanting to help, he bandaged her wound with his own handkerchief, showing care and attention to her condition. He added that it is essential to apply medication so that the wound heals faster and does not cause complications. Christina didn't understand when this man had managed to cause her such harm, feeling a mixture of surprise and anxiety. The knight noted that he was deviating and wanted men to take care of her, protecting and supporting her in this difficult situation. Suddenly, someone else spoke to the lady, interrupting their conversation and adding new details to what was happening. It turned out to be a maid who reported that she had exchanged all the chips for money, successfully completing an important task. Even in the chaos, she managed to turn the chips into gold coins, which was amazing in its accuracy and skill. Christina was delighted to see that the maid had succeeded, and it made a strong impression on her. When they hugged, they held the bird lightly, showing tenderness and caution at the same time. The Marquis noted that now that everyone was gathered, it was time to act and move on to the next stage of events. He said that they should be leaving now and that there was no point in arguing since her safety was the most important thing. It was dangerous to be here alone, and he offered to accompany her to avoid any possible danger. He extended his hand and Christina took it without hesitation, trusting his care and attention to her. She confirmed her consent and he smiled, demonstrating ease and friendliness which pleasantly surprised her. Christina had never seen such beautiful eyes before, and it made her a little confused. She felt a slight embarrassment, realizing that she found herself under the Marquis's attentive and piercing gaze. By the way, she would like to ask him a few questions to better understand the motives of his behavior. She wondered why he had come to her, given the danger and chance nature of the meeting. It was not a good place for a meeting, and he could have ignored her. But he was eager to make a good impression. He wanted to get something, and Christina assumed that it was about magical research tools. He usually sent his inquiries through the academy, and now he wanted to discuss the details directly with Christina. Since most of the documents went through her, he probably found the meeting more productive. As expected, Christina guessed the stranger's intentions at their first meeting, showing attention and observation. Christina noted that calling them acquaintances would be too much, since their meeting was more of a chance meeting. She understood that rumors could arise if they became too close, and this could have unwanted consequences. It was important to him. But Christina immediately noticed that something about him looked unusual and serious. He showed that he didn't care about men who didn't notice Melissa's charm, focusing on something else. He seems to be interested solely in developing magical tools rather than personal connections or intrigue. Then Christina suggested that perhaps he wanted to date her, and this thought surprised her a little. These words made him stumble and almost fall, which added comedy and surprise to the situation. She managed to support him and ask if everything was okay, showing care and attention to him. He said that if she didn't like the idea, his efforts would be in vain, acknowledging her right to choose. Christina noted that he may still have certain standards and boundaries that he follows. However, it seemed that he had lived his life recklessly, but was ready to be with Christina if she allowed him to. Her ease and confidence made him seem almost insignificant next to her energy and intelligence. Christina added that if he doesn't like something, he can disagree and stick to his opinion. She suggested pretending they were dating to avoid unnecessary attention, demonstrating cunning and calculation. Now she looked pitiful, and the Marquis began to get indignant, trying to understand the situation and her condition. He asked to wait a minute before heading to his estate so that they could discuss everything calmly. They intended to discuss the events in a calm environment in order to resolve the issues without unnecessary stress. Christina confirmed that she liked coffee, and this became a small but important moment in their conversation. The lady asked him if he wanted something to eat, but he replied that everything was fine and he did not need food. Since he lost his taste after the accident, he could not enjoy food, which had become a habit for him. Christina apologized, saying she didn't know if she had scared him with her words or actions earlier. She didn't want to discuss it suddenly, without preparation or contact, so as not to cause unnecessary anxiety. He smiled and noted that he was curious why she brought this up now, causing a slight intrigue. He tried to show her that she might like his behavior, but Christina immediately denied it, leaving the situation tense. She thought that if someone with such a miserable life, spending their days in clubs, wanted to be taken seriously, it was ridiculous. He was stunned by what he heard, and even the servant who was nearby could not hide his surprise, choking from the unexpectedness. Christina's maid, who had been secretly spying, also barely contained her surprise, looking at what was happening with confusion and slight fear. The bird was shocked. It seemed that this seductive and dangerous handsome man had truly lost touch with reality and was behaving strangely. Christina advised Presto the Piaggi not to laugh too much, suggesting that they could share the fun together to make it look more natural. Later, in the carriage, laughter was supposed to unite people, so that the atmosphere seemed light and cheerful, and so that no one would get bored on a long journey. She admitted that she had always been in inner turmoil, which made her a poor teacher. He just wanted to sort out some of his own affairs. He had finished all his business and therefore had no reason to return there again, feeling free from previous obligations and worries. Christina noted that no one will return to this ruined place because the owners made sure that it no longer functions. People who were there today claimed that this was the first time in Italy that a random event had occurred, surprising everyone with its unexpected nature. But this was a clear pretext since the matter concerned business relations, and there was no need to go into detail to explain the obvious facts. He considered it pointless to rush, to complete business and to rush to provide an escort, preferring to act measuredly and deliberately. But when she smiled so beautifully, he realized that any objections were pointless. Her charm completely captured his attention. The man simply noted that her smile made her appearance especially attractive and added extraordinary charm to her image. She looked at his face again, noting his handsomeness and mannerisms, which were combined with a slight threat and attraction at the same time. With deep and tender eyes, even though it was only their second meeting, she wondered what kind of place would be suitable for a honeymoon. Since she couldn't go to clubs anymore, she decided to ignore the minor flaws and focus on more important things. In any case, he wanted to know the details of her romantic story and understand how it developed without missing any details. Christina noted that the story was perfect. When she turned him down, it created an interesting and unusual twist in their relationship. That shameless guy they saw at the magic item shop proposed to her this morning, leaving her confused. He even included a letter of recommendation from the prince, trying to put pressure on her. But Christina's grandfather insisted that she ignore it. Christina did not want to be subjected to unnecessary troubles and therefore looked for another solution to maintain her peace and independence. The gentleman noted the strangeness of the situation. Why is the prince applying such petty and personal pressure on the family if it does not make much sense? He noted that he had always been close to Rodrigue and that their connection was enough to make him feel confident in any difficult situation. He relied on his contacts and believed that this would allow him to survive any difficult situation without experiencing serious risk. Then the gentleman asked her if she had any wishes, what she could want from him to make the situation easier. Christina asked him to pretend that there was a romantic relationship between them to hide the real circumstances. Even the imperial family could not separate the lovers by force, so this plan allowed their relationship to be preserved without interference. If he had studied the Academy's documents, he should have known that investing directly with it is much faster and more profitable than investing in research. He knew this, so he came to the store to look for her. To be honest, he had some doubts about his actions. Christina noted that it seemed more profitable than visiting a club, although something else was holding him back. And it didn't matter now. She promised that she would break up with them if necessary, hoping that it would not turn into a real problem or trouble. He smiled, remembering that he had never used such dishonest tactics before, finding it unacceptable for himself. However, he had changed a lot in recent years, and now he hoped that she would not regret her decision in agreeing to the proposed deal. Christina said that this is exactly what she thought, and promised to make sure that all her wishes were carried out correctly. He believed that even if the lady changed her mind tomorrow, she would not be able to back down from her words and obligations stipulated by the agreement. Christina was a little surprised by this fact, realizing that her decisions were now associated with certain responsibilities and obligations. But she still agreed. He pointed out that he was not the kind of person to be involved with 20 other matters, and therefore he was obliged to warn her out of politeness. The same was true for her. In addition, she asked if he had any friends to understand his social connections and support. He said that he had no friends, and she noted that they already had something important and in common that connected their interests and plans. She also wanted to take the opportunity to ask him for one condition that would symbolize their deal and mutual trust. She asked the spy to give her a bag of gold to provide the necessary resources for the planned actions and experiments. In addition, she wanted him to use the money for specific purposes, as the amount was too large to simply put it aside. With these funds, he was supposed to set up a research laboratory right here, creating conditions for future experiments and tests. She planned to set up a laboratory on her property, but encountered a number of problems and obstacles that prevented her from realizing her plans. Her grandfather's coffee ban meant that some research was impossible, creating additional difficulties for her. She even developed a habit of adding stimulants to her coffee to help her focus and work in chaotic and stressful situations. Perhaps a healthy diet would have prolonged her life, but she chose stimulants, risking her health and potentially shortening her life by several years. Melkish offered to provide the lab for free, but she decided to use only her own collected money to maintain her independence. Despite his wealth, she did not want to trust him, because ordinary people on the coast also did not trust those who led reckless lives in the club. He said that he understood her position and was willing to provide the room if she made a list of what she needed, and he would immediately acquire it. Christina was delighted because now she would be able to do things discreetly without revealing that they were dating or spending time together. He asked what kind of magical tools she needed in order to understand what specific resources or items she needed to prepare for the work. Then the gentleman clarified what exactly she would like to receive in order to choose the appropriate solution and not waste energy on unnecessary items. He said he needed a magical device that could change a person's eye color, which was an unusual and extremely specific request. Christina was shocked to hear this. To her, such a magical instrument seemed strange and even shocking, but extremely valuable.